Welcome to Potter Read. Today's adventure. Harry found his parents' hidden will at age 7 and exposed who really sent him to the Dursleys. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The hidden will. The cupboard under the stairs had a lock on the outside, and Harry Potter had spent a year learning everything it could teach him. He knew that the third stair from the bottom creaked under Vernon's weight, but not Petunia's. He knew that the gap beneath the door let in exactly enough light at 7 in the morning to read by, if he held the page at the right angle. He knew that the spiders did not bite, that the smell of frying bacon meant he would be let out soon, and that the safest thing a boy could do in this house was to be quiet, useful, and impossible to notice. He was 7 years old. He had taught himself to read from cereal boxes and the discarded newspapers Vernon left folded on the arm of his chair, and from there to Dudley's abandoned school books, which Dudley had never opened and never missed. Harry remembered things. He had discovered this about himself the way other children discover they can run fast or hold their breath underwater. He read a thing once and it stayed whole, the way a photograph stayed. He had not told anyone. In this house, a talent was a thing to be punished for. So when the strangeness began on a gray Tuesday in the second week of May, Harry did what he always did with strange things. He watched and he kept count and he said nothing. It started with the letters. The first came at 7:30, while Petunia was scraping margarine across Vernon's toast and Dudley was kicking the table leg in a rhythm that had no name. Harry heard the flap of the letterbox and was sent, as he always was, to fetch the post. He knelt on the cold tile of the hall and gathered the envelopes, and one of them was not like the others. It was heavy. The paper was thick as card and faintly yellow like old ivory, and it had no stamp. Where a stamp should have been there was a circle of red wax, pressed with a mark he could not read, a shield, and across it something that might have been a sword crossed with a key. The front of the envelope said, in green ink that shone a little when the light moved across it, Mr. H. Potter, The Cupboard Under the Stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. Harry read it 3 times. Then he understood 3 things in quick order, the way one stone knocks loose the next. The first thing was that whoever had written this knew where he slept. Not the smallest bedroom that the Dursleys told visitors was his. The cupboard, the actual place. The second thing was that this was, beyond any argument, a letter for him, the only letter in the whole of his life that had ever had his name on it. The third thing was that if Vernon saw it, Harry would never find out what it said. He had perhaps 4 seconds. He used them. He slid the heavy envelope flat against his stomach, under the waistband of Dudley's old trousers, and pulled his too large jumper down over it, and carried the rest of the post into the kitchen with his face arranged into nothing at all. Bills, Vernon grunted, taking them. Bill, postcard from Marge. He did not look at Harry. Nobody looked at Harry, which was, on this particular morning, the most useful fact in the world. Harry was given 2 pieces of toast and told to weed the front bed before the sun got high. He went out gladly. He knelt in the dirt beside the hydrangeas where the hedge hid him from the window, and he opened his letter. It was not what he expected, because he had not known what to expect, and that was the start of everything. Gringotts, Office of Inheritance and Estate, by order of the reckoning of the 7th year. He read it once and had it forever, and even so he read it again, because the words rearranged the world each time they went in. To the heir of the House of Potter, you have come of accounting. Under the law of the bank, an heir whose bloodkin lie deceased must be rendered, in his 7th year, a true and full reckoning of the estate that waits in his name. 6 summonses have been sent to you across 6 years. None has been answered. This troubles us. The bank does not lose an heir. The bank does not forget a vault. If this notice reaches your hand, present it at the doors of Gringotts, Diagon Alley, London, and you will be known. If it does not, we will come to you as the law requires. Signed, Ironclaw, Keeper of the Accounts of the House of Potter. Harry knelt in the dirt with the green ink shining up at him and felt, for the first time he could remember, that he was a person who had something. An estate, a vault. A name that came attached to other words, House of Potter, as though it were a thing with weight and history and a place that waited for him. He did not believe it. He was 7, not stupid. He knew that a letter promising a fortune to a boy in a cupboard was exactly the kind of trick the world played on boys in cupboards, but he noticed that it did not ask him for anything. It did not ask him to send money or to keep a secret or to come alone to a dark place. It said, if it does not reach you, we will come to you. It spoke of him as a problem the writer intended to solve whether he cooperated or not. And it said 6 summonses across 6 years. 6 letters he had never seen. Harry thought about the post. He thought about Vernon, who burned anything that came without a return address, who had once flown into a purple rage over a circular for a fortune-teller and shouted about "not in my house." He thought about how a letter for a boy who did not officially exist might be very easy to make disappear 6 times over 6 years if someone in this house wished it so. But the letter said the writer had sent them and never gotten an answer, and that this troubled him. Whoever Ironclaw was, he did not think Harry had ignored him. He thought the letters had been stopped. Harry pulled 3 weeds because the bed had to look weeded, and he turned the problem over and over while his hands worked. Then he heard the gate. The man at the gate was not a man. He was perhaps the height of Harry himself, which made him very short for an adult and very strange for everything else. His skin had the color and texture of old leather left out in the weather. His fingers were too long and ended in dark nails filed to points. He wore a suit of charcoal gray, cut sharply, and a hat he did not remove, and his eyes, when they found Harry kneeling in the flower bed, were black and clever and entirely without surprise. "Heir Potter," the creature said. Its voice was low and dry, like two stones considering each other. "You weed a muggle's garden." Harry did not run. He had learned, in a house where running brought worse than standing still, that the safest thing to do with a danger was to make it talk. "I'm not allowed to be called that," he said. "Potter, my aunt says it like it tastes bad." "Your aunt?" The black eyes moved past Harry to the house, to the net curtains, to the small, clipped meanness of the lawn, and something passed across the leathery face that Harry would later understand was contempt, though at the time he only knew that the creature did not like what it saw. "I am Griffook of Gringotts. I have come because the letters did not." "You're a ward runner," Harry said. The black eyes came back to him, and for the first time the creature looked startled. "How does a muggle-raised child of 7 know that word?" "Your letter said the bank would come if the letters didn't reach me. It said the law requires it. So there's a law that makes someone come in person when the post fails. A person whose job's to go where the letters can't. You'd want a short word for that. Wardrunner sounds like a short word for a job." Harry sat back on his heels. "Did I get it right?" Griffook regarded him for a long moment. Then he did something with his mouth that was not quite a smile, because goblin smiles are not built for reassurance. "Close enough that I will not correct you," he said. "Stand up, Heir Potter. We have somewhere to be and not much grace in which to get there. My uncle won't let me leave the garden." "Your uncle," said Griffook, "has nothing to say in this. You are the blood heir of a vaulted estate, and your bloodkin who held authority over you are dead. Under the treaty, when the bank issues a writ of accounting, no muggle guardianship stands against it. They cannot stop you, they cannot follow you, and if your uncle lays a hand on a creature of Gringotts come lawfully to its business, the pointed nails flexed once, he will discover what the rest of his world has spent 1,000 years learning to leave alone." Harry looked at the house. He looked at the cupboard window, low to the ground, with the little vent he had memorized the shape of. He looked at the gardens of Privet Drive, every one the same, where for 7 years he had been told in 100 small ways that he was a thing that had been left here and forgotten. "6 letters," he said. "You sent 6 and somebody stopped them, before they got to the house or after." "That," said Griffook, "is precisely the question that has the bank's attention. Come and ask it of someone who can answer." Harry stood up and brushed the dirt from his knees. He did not go and tell the Dursleys. He simply walked out of the gate, and the gate did not so much as squeak, and 4 Privet Drive watched him go through its net curtains and did nothing at all, because Griffook had done something to the morning, some quiet bending of attention, so that for the space of 3 minutes the people inside that house found they had absolutely no reason to look at the front garden. By the time Vernon thought to wonder where the boy had got to, the boy was gone, and the question slid off his mind like water off glass and would not catch again for hours. They traveled in a way Harry did not have words for and refused, on principle, to be frightened by. Griffook took his wrist in a dry, strong grip, said a word that was not English, and the garden folded. It did not blur or spin. It folded the way a sheet of paper folds, Privet Drive creasing down its middle and being pressed flat against somewhere else, and then the somewhere else opened up and they were standing in it. Harry's stomach informed him it had strong feelings about this. He told his stomach it could have its feelings later. He was busy. They were in a street that should not have fit inside London. It lined. The buildings stooped over a cobbled lane like old men sharing a secret, their upper floors so close they nearly touched, and signs hung from iron brackets, a cauldron, an owl, a wand throwing sparks, and the crowd that moved beneath them wore robes, actual robes and pointed hats, and not one of them found this strange. Harry found it the opposite of strange. He found it correct. Some part of him that had spent 7 years being told it was wrong about everything looked at a man buying a newspaper whose photographs moved and thought, "Yes, this is the part they didn't tell me." "Magic," he said, not a question. "Magic," Griffook agreed, already walking. "You will gawp later. Keep up." At the end of the lane stood a building that did not stoop. It was white, and it rose, and it was the only thing in that crooked street with the confidence to stand straight. Bronze doors stood open at the top of a flight of white stairs, and over them, cut into the stone, were words that Harry read once and kept. "Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed, for those who take but do not earn must pay most dearly in their turn." "That's a warning," Harry said. "It is a promise," said Griffook, and led him in. Inside, Gringotts was a hall of marble and lamplight, with a high vaulted ceiling and long counters behind which 100 goblins worked at ledgers, weighing coins, examining jewels through glasses that made their eyes enormous, scratching at columns of figures with quills. Nobody hurried. The whole vast room had the patience of a thing that had been here 1,000 years and expected to be here 1,000 more, and Harry felt the attention of it settle on him as he crossed the floor, as though the building itself were keeping count. Griffook did not take him to a counter. He took him to a door and through the door to a corridor, and to a room at the end where an old goblin sat behind a desk the size of a dining table, and where the air smelled of iron and ink and something colder underneath. Ironclaw, said Griffook, the potter heir. I found him weeding a muggle's garden behind a hedge, kept in a cupboard, dressed in another child's rags and answering to no name at all. The old goblin behind the desk looked up. Ironclaw was older than Griffook and harder, and where Griffook's cleverness moved across his face like weather, Ironclaw sat still and deep like a thing at the bottom of a well. He wore half-moon spectacles low on his long nose, and he set down his quill with a precision that was its own kind of language, and he looked at Harry for a long time without speaking. Sit, he said at last. Harry sat. The chair was too big and his feet did not reach the floor, and he resolved not to let this matter. You are Harry James Potter, Ironclaw said, born the 31st of July, 1980, son of James Charles Potter and Lily Potter, formerly Evans. Heir sole and undisputed of the House of Potter, an account opened in this bank in the time of your 7 times great-grandfather and never once in 3 centuries in default. If you say so, Harry said. I only found out I had parents with last names this morning. Something happened in the old goblin's face. It was not softness. Goblins do not do softness. But the stillness deepened and grew colder, and Harry understood that the cold was not for him. Tell me, said Ironclaw, what you have been told about yourself, about how you came to that house. So Harry told him. He told it flatly, the way he did everything, because flatness was armor. He told him that his parents had died in a car crash when he was a baby, that his father had been a drunk and unemployed, that he, Harry, had been left on the Dursleys' doorstep because there was nowhere else for him and nobody else who wanted him, and that he should be grateful every day that they had taken him in when they did not have to. He told him about the cupboard without calling it a tragedy, because he had never been allowed to think of it as one. He told him that his name was a thing his aunt said like it tasted bad. When he finished, the room was very quiet. James Potter, said Ironclaw in a voice like a closing door, was the wealthiest wizard of his generation. He never in his life held a paid position because he never in his life needed one, and he gave more gold to the relief of the war than any house but 2. He did not drink, he did not crash. He and your mother were murdered in their home on the 31st of October, 1981, and the manner of it is written in the histories of your people, where you would have read it years ago had anyone permitted you to learn that you have a people. He removed his spectacles. Every word you have been told about yourself is a lie, Heir Potter. I want you to hear me say that once plainly so that you may stop carrying it. Every word. Harry did not cry. He had unlearned crying years ago. It cost too much and bought nothing. But something moved through him that was bigger than crying, a kind of vast and silent rearrangement, like a house settling onto a foundation it had been hovering above for years. Why, he said. His voice came out steady. He was proud of that. Why would they lie? Why would anyone? I'm nobody. I'm a boy in a cupboard. What's the point of lying that hard to nobody? Because, said Ironclaw, you are not nobody. And because somebody went to a great deal of trouble to make certain you would believe you were. He put his spectacles back on. Which brings us to why I have spent 6 years sending letters into a silence, and why this morning I broke that silence with a runner. Heir Potter, there is a thing in your family's vault that should not be there, and there is a thing missing from it that should be. What's missing? In a moment. First you will see what is there. Ironclaw rose, and he was not much taller standing than sitting, but the room seemed to arrange itself around him as he moved. Your parents, before they died, were careful people. The Potters have always been careful with us. It is half the reason the house has lasted. When they made their preparations, and they made them well and made them late in the last weeks of their lives, as people do when they have begun to understand they are being hunted, they lodged the most important of those preparations here, in the deepest part of their vault, under the oldest seal we keep. He looked at Harry over the spectacles. A blood seal, a document that no hand may open but the blood of the heir for whom it was written. Yours. A will, Harry said, the black eyes sharpened. What makes you say so? You said they made it when they understood they were being hunted. People who think they're going to die write down what happens to their things and their kids after. Harry shrugged, a thin movement of one shoulder. And you said it's missing something that should be there, which means somebody already wanted me not to read it. The only paper worth that much trouble is the paper that says where I was supposed to go, which isn't the Dursleys, or you wouldn't be this angry. Griffook by the door made a low sound that might have been a laugh. Ironclaw did not laugh. He looked at Harry for a moment more, and then he said quietly, 7 years old. Nearly 8, Ironclaw agreed. Come, there is a cart. The cart ran on rails that plunged down through the rock under London into a dark that had its own weather, and it went very fast, and Harry decided he liked it. He had spent his life being driven slowly to places he did not want to go. There was something in him that woke up and stood at the front of the cart with its hands on the cold metal rail and grinned into the wind, and that thing was, he understood dimly, the part of him that the Dursleys had been trying so hard to keep in a cupboard. They went down past chambers that breathed cold, past an underground lake the cart skimmed along the edge of, past a far-off sound that might have been a chained thing turning over in its sleep. Griffook rode in the front. Ironclaw rode beside Harry and did not hold the rail and did not flinch at the drops and watched the boy more than the road. The Potter vault was old. Harry knew it was old the way you know a forest is old, by the quality of the silence. The door was iron, deep graven with the crest from the envelope, the shield, the crossed sword and key, and there was no keyhole. Ironclaw laid one long hand flat against it and spoke, and the iron remembered him and opened. Inside was more gold than Harry had a frame for. Coins in drifts and slopes, gold and silver and bronze, and beyond them shapes under cloth and shelves, and the dull gleam of things that had been precious for longer than Surrey had been a county. He did not gawp because Griffock had told him not to, and because gawping was for people who could afford to look like fools. But he stood in the doorway of the wealth that his whole life had been spent calling a lie, and he let himself feel the size of the lie once before he set it down. Not the gold, said Ironclaw. The gold is the least of what was stolen from you, this way. At the back of the vault, set into the living rock, was a smaller door, a strongbox built into the stone itself, no larger than a bread oven. Its face was a single sheet of dark metal, and across that metal lay a seal. Harry had expected the family seal again, the shield and sword and key. That was there beneath, pressed into a disc of red wax the size of his palm, the true seal, the Potter seal his parents' own. But over it, slapped across it, half covering it, was a second seal he had never seen. This one was purple-black, the color of a bruise, and its wax had a greasy sheen the red wax did not, and the mark pressed into it was a great ornate W wreathed in laurels, with words around the rim too small to read from where he stood. And the thing about the second seal, the thing Harry saw before Ironclaw said a single word, was that it did not match. The strongbox, the iron, the red wax, the rock, the very air of the vault, all of it was old and patient and of a piece, the way everything in Gringotts was of a piece. The purple-black seal was none of those things. It sat on the metal like a sticker on a cathedral. It had been put there by someone who did not belong in this vault, who had reached into the oldest and most private room of a dead family and pressed their own mark over the family S, and the wrongness of it was so total that Harry's skin prickled. He walked to the strongbox. Neither goblin stopped him. He went up close to the purple-black seal and read the tiny words around its rim and kept them. By the authority of the chief warlock of the Wisengamot, sealed under emergency powers. Not to be opened, read, or executed save by order of the same. Harry stood very still. He was 7 years old and he had been told his whole life that he understood nothing, and he understood in that vault with perfect and terrible clarity exactly what he was looking at. That's not yours, he said. The bank S, that second seal, that's not a goblin thing. The metal, the door, the writing on the wall outside, all of that is the bank S, all of it matches. That, he pointed, and his finger did not shake because he would not let it, that came from outside. Somebody from your wizard government reached all the way down here into my parents' vault and put their own seal over my parents' will and wrote, "Don't open this" on it. He turned to Ironclaw. And you let them. The temperature of the room seemed to drop 10 degrees, and it was not Harry the cold came from. No, said Ironclaw, the word had edges. We did not let them. That is the entire matter, Heir Potter, and you have walked to the heart of it in under a minute, which is more than the bank itself managed for the better part of a year. He came and stood beside Harry and looked at the purple-black seal with an expression Harry would not have wanted turned on himself. Do you understand what you're seeing truly? Then understand this with it. The vault of a Gringotts client is sovereign ground. It is the oldest article of the treaty between your kind and mine, older than your ministry, older than your Wisengamot, signed in blood when both our peoples were young. What is sealed in a vault is sealed by the bank and answers to the bank and to the blood for which it was made. No wizard authority runs here. None. A wand has no jurisdiction past those bronze doors. That and his pointed nail came within an inch of the purple wax, is a wizard's hand laid upon ground where wizards have no hand to lay. It is not merely a theft from you, child. It is an act of war against my people, committed in the dark 6 years ago against a vault we were sworn to keep, and we did not know it was here until the law of your 7th year forced us to open this box and prepare your reckoning, and we found a stranger's seal waiting in the place we keep our oldest faith. Harry looked from the seal to the goblin and back. You're not angry on my behalf, he said slowly. Not really, you're angry on yours. Somebody made the bank look like it couldn't keep a vault. Yes, said Ironclaw, and there was something almost like respect in it. We are angry on ours, you should be glad of it. A goblin angry for your sake is a kindness, and kindness's end. A goblin angry for his own sake is a force of nature, and it does not rest until the ledger is balanced. He turned from the seal to face the boy fully. Their account and yours, Heir Potter, run in the same direction now. Whoever did this wronged you and insulted us in the same stroke. For as long as that remains true, you will not find a more relentless ally in the world than the creature standing in front of you. Do you understand? Yes, said Harry. He understood it better than the goblin perhaps knew. He had spent 7 years surviving in a house by finding the one thing the people in power wanted and making himself necessary to it. He understood alliance the way other children understood games. What does the seal do? Can you take it off? It does precisely what it claims. It forbids the box to be opened, the document to be read, or the will to be carried out except by order of the one who placed it. Ironclaw's mouth thinned. And no, we cannot take it off, not by force. That is the cruelty in its design, and I confess the cunning of it galls me. A blood seal, the Potter seal, the red one your parents own, opens for one thing only, the blood of the heir, yours. Were that the only seal here, you could open this box this minute with a pricked finger and read what your mother and father wished said to you, and no power on earth could prevent it. His nail moved to the purple wax. But this is a binding, not a lock. It does not keep the box shut. It keeps the bank from acting. We are bound by the treaty not to break a lawful ministry seal, even one unlawfully placed, until its unlawfulness is proven and ruled. To break it ourselves, on our own say-so, would give your government the very thing it would love, a goblin caught violating wizard law, a war begun by our hand instead of theirs. They counted on that. Whoever did this counted on the bank being too proud and too careful to simply tear their seal away. And the bank, he finished, with a bitterness Harry had not heard from him before, has spent 6 years being exactly that careful, and the boy it failed has spent 6 years in a cupboard. Harry was quiet for a moment. The vault breathed its cold around them. But it's a ministry seal, he said. You said, and I'm not the ministry, I'm the blood. The red seal opens for me. It does, so the box can be opened by me, the will inside can be read by me. The only thing the purple seal stops is the bank acting on it, carrying it out, executing it, making it official. It doesn't stop me from finding out what it says. Harry looked up. Does it? The two goblins exchanged a glance over his head, and in that glance was a whole conversation, and Harry caught the shape of it. The box is a binding on us, not on him. We never thought to ask whether the blood could simply read past it, because no blood we have ever dealt with was a child of 7 asking the question on the day he learned magic was real. We do not know, said Ironclaw at last, and Harry could hear that the honesty cost him. It has never been tried. The binding was placed to stop the bank. You are not the bank. You are the blood, and the blood has rights the binding does not name and therefore perhaps cannot touch. It may open for you, it may not. It may, his eyes flicked to the purple seal, do something else. These are old magics, layered carelessly one over the other by a hand that valued speed over craft, and where two old magics meet at a careless join, the result is rarely safe and never certain. What's the worst that happens? The binding takes the document, said Griffook from the doorway, who had been silent a long while. If a hand the binding judges unlawful tries to take what it guards, it can burn what it guards rather than yield it. Your parents' last words could turn to ash between your fingers, Heir Potter, and you would never know what they said, and there would be no second copy and no second chance. The vault was very quiet. Harry looked at the strongbox. He looked at the red wax of his parents' true seal, half hidden under the bruise-colored wax of the seal that a stranger had pressed over it in the dark, 6 years ago, the same week his mother and father were buried. He thought about the 6 letters that had come and gone without reaching him. He thought about a man, for it was a man, it had a W and a title and a signature, somewhere, under all that careful cruelty, a man who had reached into the most private room of a dead family and decided on his own authority that the dead would not be heard and the boy would not be told. He thought very clearly in the flat interior voice that had kept him alive. They want me to be afraid to open it. The whole thing is built to make me afraid to open it. Fear is the lock. It was always the lock. I'm not going to open it today, Harry said. Both goblins looked at him. You just told me it might burn what's inside if I get it wrong, so I'm not going to get it wrong by doing it today in a hurry, the first hour I find out any of this is real, because I'm 7 and excited and angry, and that's exactly the state a person makes mistakes in. He turned away from the strongbox deliberately and looked up at Ironclaw. I want to know everything first. I want to know what the purple seal is exactly and what law it claims and whether that law is real and who has a W for a title and how a blood seal reads and what's the safest way to open it so it doesn't decide I'm unlawful. I want to do it once and do it right and have it work. He paused. You said you've been careful for 6 years and it cost me. I don't want you to be careful, I want you to be thorough. There's a difference and I think you know it, and I think it's why you sent a runner this morning instead of writing a 7th letter you knew would vanish like the rest. For a moment nobody said anything at all. Then Ironclaw, keeper of the accounts of the House of Potter, did a thing that Griffook would tell other goblins about for years, in the low rooms where goblins tell each other the things that matter. He inclined his head, not a nod. A bow small exact, the bow a goblin gives an equal in a matter of business, the rarest courtesy his people had to offer a creature not their own. Thorough, he said, is a word the bank understands. You will have everything you have asked for, Heir Potter, and more besides, because the more I learn of how this was done to you, the more I find I wish to balance, and the bank balances in full or not at all. He straightened. There is one among us who has spent his life in the law of wills and inheritances, who knows every statute your ministry has ever passed, and every place those statutes contradict themselves. His name is Sharptongue, and he is, I will warn you, deeply unpleasant, and he will like you, which will be worse. We will take what we need from this vault to begin, and we will leave the box sealed until you are ready, and we will build the case that opens it so cleanly that no power in the wizarding world can call it unlawful when you do. And the Dursleys? Harry asked. I left, they'll notice eventually. Vernon will, the Dursleys, said Ironclaw, have a writ of accounting standing over them and do not know it, and will continue not to know it for precisely as long as it suits the bank. You are under the protection of Gringotts as a client in good standing on the business of his estate, and no muggle and no wizard takes a client off these premises against the client's will. You will sleep tonight in a bed, Heir Potter, the first decent bed of your life, and you will eat until you are full, and tomorrow you will begin to learn the shape of what was done to you. The cupboard is closed. I promise you that much, and a goblin's promise is the only currency we do not counterfeit. Harry stood in the cold light of his parents' vault in front of a strongbox sealed twice over, once by the people who had loved him, and once by whoever had decided he must never know it, and for the first time in his life he was not afraid of what came next. He was something better than unafraid. He was curious, the deep, hungry, patient curiosity of a mind that has finally been handed a problem worth the whole of its attention, and he looked at the bruise-colored seal with its laurel-wreathed W and its borrowed authority, and he thought, who put you there? And what did you not want me to read? He did not say it aloud. He did not need to. Ironclaw was watching his face, and the old goblin had spent 300 years reading the faces of people who wanted things, and he saw the question form, and he saw the boy decide to answer it no matter what it cost or how long it took, and something in the keeper of the account settled into place like a coin dropping true into a slot. Come, Heir Potter, he said, we have a great deal of careful work to do, and we are going to do every bit of it thoroughly. They left the strongbox sealed in the dark and took the cart back up toward the light, and behind them the purple-black seal sat on the iron and did not know yet that its 6 quiet years were over. The room they gave him was small and high in the bank, with a slit of window looking out over Diagon Alley's crooked roofs, and a bed with actual blankets, and a tray that came up by itself on a brass dumbwaiter and held more food than Harry had been given at one sitting in his life. He ate slowly because his stomach had opinions about volume, and because he wanted to remember it. He had nearly finished when the door opened without a knock, and a goblin even older than Ironclaw came in and looked at him as though he were a sum that had failed to add up. This one was bent and dry, and his eyes were the yellow of old paper, and he carried a stack of ledgers so heavy it should have folded him in two. He dropped them on the end of the bed with a thud that rattled the tray. You are the cupboard child, he said. His voice was a file drawn across rust. Ironclaw says you asked to be thorough rather than careful. Ironclaw is sentimental in his old age, and I did not believe him. Say something that proves it, or I will go to bed and resent having climbed these stairs. Harry looked at the ledgers. They were the bank's old, their spines stamped with years. You brought the records, he said, all of them. You didn't bring the will because the will's still in the vault and you can't touch it. So those are everything around the will, every letter you sent, every time someone touched the Potter account. The day the purple seal went on and who signed for it. He looked up. You're sharp-tongued, and you didn't climb the stairs for me. You climbed them because somebody made the bank look like it couldn't keep a vault, and you've been waiting 6 years for someone with the right blood to walk in and give you a reason to take their seal apart in front of them. The yellow eyes considered him for a long, dry moment. Ironclaw, said Sharptongue at last to no one, is not sentimental. He climbed onto the chair by the bed, which left his feet a great distance from the floor, exactly as Harry's did, and he opened the topmost ledger to a page he had clearly marked years before. We begin tonight, cupboard child, not with what they took, with how. The how is where the careless hand always leaves its fingerprints, and I have spent 6 years staring at one fingerprint I could not name. He turned the ledger so Harry could see it, a single line dated the 5th of November 1981, and a signature beside it that the boy could not yet read in the lamplight. By the end of the week you will know whose hand this is, and then, Heir Potter, we will decide together what it costs him. Harry pulled the ledger closer, and the food went cold, and he did not notice, because for the first time in his life someone had handed him a true thing and asked him to be clever about it on purpose. Behind them and far below, the purple-black seal sat on the iron in the dark, and did not know yet that its 6 quiet years were over. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. What they wanted. It took Harry 4 days to earn the right to open his parents' will, and he spent every hour of them gladly, because Sharptongue had told him on the first morning that haste was how the careless lost what the patient kept, and Harry had decided that he would never again be the careless one in any room. They worked in a low chamber off the main hall, where the lamps burned green, and the walls were lined floor to ceiling with the bound law of the wizarding world. Sharptongue did not teach the way Harry imagined teachers taught. He set a thing in front of the boy and waited to be proven worth his time, and when Harry proved it, he set down a harder thing, and the only praise he ever gave was a harder thing. A blood seal, Sharptongue said on the first day, tapping a diagram he had drawn in red ink, is not a lock that a key turns. It is a question the magic asks of the hand that touches it. The question is, are you the one this was made for? If the blood answers true, the seal opens. If it answers false, the seal does nothing and remembers your face and tells its maker you tried. He looked at Harry over the yellow rims of his eyes. Your parents' red seal will ask that question of you and receive a true answer. That part is certain. That part is not what I am worried about. The purple one, Harry said. The purple one. Sharptongue's mouth curled. It does not ask whether you are the heir. It does not care who you are. It asks a different question, and the question it asks is this hand permitted to take what I guard? And it has been told by the fool who placed it that only one hand in the world is permitted, the hand that signed it. Yours is not that hand. If you reach in and take the document out of the box, the binding will judge you a thief, and it will burn the document rather than be robbed of it. That is what we must get around, cupboard child, not the reading, the taking. Harry thought about that for the rest of the day and most of the night, lying in the high small room with the slit of window, turning it over and over. He brought his answer to Sharptongue on the second morning before the old goblin had finished his first cup of the bitter black tea goblins drank. The binding stops me taking it, Harry said. It doesn't stop me reading it. You said the red seal opens the box for my blood. So my blood opens the box, and the box opens, and the will is sitting there in front of me, but I don't pick it up. I don't take it out. I leave it exactly where it is, and I just read it in the box in the vault without moving it an inch. The binding's got nothing to judge. Nobody's taking anything. I'm only looking. Sharptongue set down his tea. And while I read it, Harry went on, because he had thought past the first move to the second, the way the long nights in the cupboard had taught him to think past every first move. One of your scribes copies it down, word for word, a goblin copy, certified in your own hand in your own ink, made while the original never leaves the box. Then even if the purple seal burns the original someday, even if the man who put it there comes back and torches the whole vault out of spite, the words still exist in a copy the bank made and the bank witnessed, and a copy the bank witnessed is evidence no court of yours can wave away. We don't fight the binding, we just make it pointless. For a moment the old goblin said nothing. Then he picked his tea back up and drank, and Harry understood that this was the highest compliment Sharptongue had it in him to pay. There is a scribe named Bogrod, Sharptongue said, who has copied testaments in this bank for 240 years and has never once been wrong and never once been moved by anything he copied. He will do it. He set the cup down. 2 more days, cupboard child. I will not have us go down to that vault until I have read every line of the statute the purple seal claims to stand on, so that when you open the box I can tell you, to the word, exactly how unlawful the thing is that we are reading past. Patience. We do it once. We do it right. On the third day, between the law and the script, Harry asked Ironclaw a question that had been waiting under all the others. My mother's letter said there's a prophecy, that it touches me. And she said I'd be a piece on a great man's board. He set down the ledger. I don't know what I am to your world. Everyone here looks at me twice. The man buying the moving newspaper looked at my forehead, not my eyes. I want to know why before I meet anyone who knows already. I don't like being the only person in a room who doesn't know what the room thinks of me. Ironclaw was quiet for a moment, weighing how much truth a child could carry, and then he gave Harry the courtesy he gave no one under the age of 200, all of it. There was a war, he said. It ended the night your parents died, and it ended because of you, and that is the whole of why your world cannot look at your forehead without flinching. A dark wizard rose, the worst your people have produced in an age, and he gathered followers, and he killed, and for 11 years the wizarding world lost. His name was feared so badly that to this day grown men will not say it. They call him you-know-who, or the Dark Lord, as though a name were a door he might walk back through. His true name was Voldemort, and he killed my parents. He came to your house on the 31st of October, 1981, and he killed your father where he stood, and then he went up the stairs to the nursery, and he killed your mother. Ironclaw's voice did not soften, because Harry had asked for the truth, and softening it would have been a kind of lie. And then he turned his wand on you, a boy of 15 months, and he cast the curse that has no counter and no survivor, the killing curse, the one that had never in recorded history failed. It failed, Harry said. He touched his own forehead where the thin scar sat that Petunia had told him came from the car crash that had never happened. It failed, Ironclaw agreed. No one living knows how. The curse rebounded. It destroyed him, not killed. The histories are careful to say destroyed, which is a different and more troubling word, and it left you alive with that mark, the only soul ever to walk away from that curse. The war ended in an hour, and your world, which had been drowning for 11 years, woke the next morning to find itself saved by a baby it had never heard of, and it has not stopped staring at you since. They have a name for you, cupboard child. They call you the boy who lived. Harry sat with that. He turned it over, hunting the edges, and he found the edge his mother had pointed at from beyond the grave, and it was sharp. So a great and good man, he said slowly, who believes in a greater good and who has decided he can see further than anyone, is handed the one child in history who survived the unsurvivable in a war that everyone thinks isn't really over. And my mother says there's a prophecy that touches me. He looked up. He wouldn't be able to leave me alone, even if he loved me, especially if he loved me. He'd have to put me somewhere he could shape and watch and keep, somewhere I'd grow up grateful and obedient and ready to be whatever the prophecy needs me to be, instead of somewhere I'd grow up loved and stubborn and my own. Harry's jaw set. Somewhere like a cupboard. My mother saw the whole thing. She just couldn't prove it in time. Ironclaw looked at the 7-year-old across the greenlit table for a long moment, and when he answered, his voice had dropped to the register goblins reserved for oaths. "I have lived 300 years," he said, "and I have watched a great many clever men arrive at the truth too late to use it. You have arrived at it at 7, with 4 days of teaching, from inside a lie built to keep you blind. I no longer wonder that your mother tore the parchment writing your name. I wonder only that the men who buried her words ever imagined they would hold." He stood. 2 more days, then the vault. So Harry waited 2 more days and learned to read the strange looping hand of wizarding script from the ledgers Sharptongue gave him, and learned the names of the great wizarding statutes the way other children learned the names of footballers. And on the 4th evening Ironclaw came to the low green chamber and said that the cart was ready, and that Bogrod was waiting, and that it was time. The vault was as cold as Harry remembered, and the strongbox sat in the living rock with its 2 seals one atop the other, the red of his parents under the bruised purple of the man who had buried them, and Bogrod the scribe knelt before it on a folded cloth with a sheet of pale parchment and an ink pot that glowed faintly from within. Ironclaw stood at Harry's right. Sharptongue stood at his left, with the relevant statutes copied out on a roll under his arm. Griffook held the lamp. "You do not have to do this tonight," Ironclaw said. It was not a test. It was, Harry understood, the goblin giving him the dignity of a true choice, the first true choice anyone had offered him in his life. "The box has waited 6 years. It will wait another 6 if you wish it. No one here will think the less of you." "I know," Harry said. "I want to do it tonight." He stepped up to the box. Sharptongue had told him exactly how. He pricked the pad of his left thumb on the silver pin the old goblin handed him. It bit clean, and a single bead of red welled up, and he pressed his thumb to the red wax of his parents' seal, the true seal, the one with the shield and the crossed sword and key. The wax was cold, then it was warm. Then it was warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, a warmth that went up through his thumb and into his wrist and sat in his chest like a hand laid flat over his heart. And Harry felt there was no other word for it, and he would never find a better one, and he would never tell anyone he felt recognized. The seal knew him, not his face, not his name, his blood. The thing in him that came down from the 2 people who had made this box and pressed this wax and died 11 days later. For one suspended moment the cold vault was full of something that was almost a voice and almost a smell and almost the memory, of being held, of being safe, of a woman's laugh and a man's hands lifting him toward a ceiling that wheeled with conjured stars. And then it was gone, and the red seal split clean down the middle, and the iron face of the strongbox swung silently open. And above the broken red seal the purple-black binding flared. It did not split. It rose. The bruise-colored wax lifted off the metal and hung in the air, turning, and the great ornate W at its heart opened like an eye, and a voice came out of it that was not a voice but the memory of an old man's certainty, dry and patient and absolutely sure of itself. "This is sealed by the authority of the chief warlock. None may take what lies within, save by order of the same." Harry did not reach into the box. He had thought about this moment for 4 days, and he knew, with the cold, clear knowledge that had kept him alive in a house full of people who wished him gone, that the entire trap was built on the assumption that he would reach in. That a child, finally face to face with the last words of the parents he had never known, would lunge for them. That grief would make him grab. The man who built this had counted on a boy's hands moving before a boy's head, so Harry put his hands behind his back. "I'm not taking anything," he said to the turning purple eye in the flat, steady voice. "I'm not a thief. I'm the blood this was made for, and I'm allowed to read what's mine, and reading isn't taking. Look as hard as you want, nothing s leaving this box." The purple seal hung in the air, turning, judging. The W searched him for the crime it had been built to punish, and did not find a hand reaching, did not find a thing being carried off, did not find a theft to burn. A binding is only as clever as the man who set it, and the man who set this one had been clever about almost everything and careless about one thing. He had forbidden the taking, and forgotten that a son does not need to take his mother's last letter to read it. The purple eye narrowed. Then slowly, with what Harry could have sworn was reluctance, the bruise-colored wax sank back down onto the iron and went still, and the binding held, and the will lay open in the box, untouched, unmoved, and entirely legible. "Bogrod," said Sharptongue softly. "Begin." The old scribe dipped his glowing quill and began to copy, and Harry leaned close, hands still behind his back, and in the green lamplight he read, for the first time, what his mother and father had wanted for him. The will of James and Lily Potter was written in 2 hands. Most of it was James's, a quick, slanting, confident hand that crossed its sevens and looped its capitals like a man who had never in his life expected a sentence of his to be questioned. But here and there, in the margins and once across an entire clause, there was a second hand, neater, smaller, fiercer, that pressed harder into the parchment. Lily's. Harry knew it the moment he saw it, the way you know a face in a crowd before you know why, and he read her words first even though they came second on the page, because his eyes went to them and would not be moved. The document itself was orderly. Sharptongue had taught him enough in 4 days to follow it. It opened with the plain statement of who they were and that they were of sound mind, and it gave the date, the 24th of October, 1981, and Harry did the arithmetic without meaning to and arrived at 11 days and put the number behind his back with his hands. Then came the estate, the trust vault, set aside for Harry's keeping and schooling, to be opened to him on his 11th birthday and into his own hand at 17. The main vault, the bulk of the Potter fortune, held for him entire. The cottage in Godric's Hollow, and a second house in the north the family had not lived in for years, and the heirlooms and invisibility cloak that James wrote of almost lightly. It has been in my family longer than anyone can prove, and Harry is to have it the day he is old enough not to use it for anything truly stupid, which is to say never, but give it him anyway, and Harry, reading that, felt the corner of his mouth do something it had not done in a long time. Then came the Potter seat. Harry had not known his family held a seat on the Wisengamot, the high court and council of the wizarding world, but they did, an old one, and the will was precise about it in a way the rest of the document was not, and Harry understood from the precision that this clause mattered to them more than the gold. The Potter seat is held in trust for our son until his majority. It is not to be voted by any proxy, regent, or guardian save by the express written consent of the guardian named below, recorded with Gringotts for each session in which it is cast. We have seen what is done in this war with the votes of the dead and the absent. Our son's voice is not to be spent for him while he cannot speak. When he is grown, he will spend it himself. Harry read that twice. He did not yet know why it made the back of his neck cold. He would know by the end of the week. And then came the guardianship, and the green lamplight seemed to dim, and the cold vault held its breath, and Harry read the names of the people who were supposed to have raised him. Should we both die, the will said in James's confident hand, the care of our son Harry James Potter shall pass in this order and by our absolute wish. First to Sirius Black, his godfather, who stood at his christening and swore the old oath over him, and whom we trust before any living soul. Sirius is to have him. There is no second choice while Sirius lives and is free. We have made him godfather in the old way with the old magic, and that is not a courtesy, it is a command, and any law or man that says otherwise can answer to the both of us in whatever comes after. Harry read the name and held it, Sirius Black, his godfather, the first and absolute choice. There is no second choice while Sirius lives and is free. He thought, then where is he? He's a name and a will, not a man who came for me. Something kept him from coming. He's alive or dead or kept, find out which. And he put the name with the date in the cold place at the back of his neck, behind his back with his hands. Should Sirius be unable, the will went on, then to Frank and Alice Elongibiotium, who are as family to us, whose own son was born 3 days before ours, so that the two boys might grow up brothers in all but blood. Alice has already said yes, the Longbottoms will love him. Should the Longbottoms be unable, then to Remus Lupin, who has been my brother since I was 11 years old, and whom the world treats as a monster for an accident of his blood, and who is gentler than the whole of the world that fears him. I know what they will say against him. I do not care what they will say against him. Remus will raise my son to be kind, and there is no one I would trust more with that one task, and the law that forbids his kind from the keeping of children is a cowardly law, and I name him in its teeth. Should Remus be unable, then to the house of Bones, to Amelia, who is honest in a city of liars, and who will at least see that he is raised by people who keep the law instead of bending it. 4 names, 4 households. A godfather, a brother family, a brother in all but blood, and an honest woman in a city of liars. 4 doors, any one of which would have opened to him, and Harry knelt in the cold vault and understood that he had been handed not a tragedy but a mathematics. 4 guardians named in order by parents who had thought it through with care, and somehow impossibly he had ended up behind the one door none of them had chosen, and then Harry read the last clause of the guardianship, and the mathematics stopped being a comfort, because the last clause was in Lily's fierce, neat, hard-pressing hand, and it was not a name. It was a wall. Under no circumstance, in no event, by no order of any court or council or well-meaning man, his mother had written, pressing so hard the quill had torn the parchment at the end of the word no, is our son to be given into the keeping of my sister, Petunia Dursley, or her husband, or their household. I know my sister. I know what she thinks of what I am and what my son will be. She would not strike him, perhaps, she is a coward, not a brute, but she would let him grow up believing he is small and wrong and unwanted, and that is a slower murder than the one I am afraid is coming for me, and I will not have it done to my child. If every other name on this page is dead, find a stranger, find a goblin, find anyone in the wide world before you find Petunia. I am his mother, and this is the one thing I ask above all the others, and I am writing it in my own hand so that no one can pretend I did not mean it. Not Petunia. Never Petunia. The vault was very quiet. Bograd's quill had stopped. Harry knelt in front of the open box with his hands behind his back, where he had put them so that he would not be a thief, and he read his mother's words a 3rd time and a 4th, and he discovered that he had been wrong about himself because he had thought he had unlearned crying years ago, and it turned out he had only mislaid it, and it came back now all at once, hot and silent down a face that had not done this in front of another living soul since he was 4 years old. He did not make a sound. He had learned that much in the cupboard, at least, how to come apart without making a sound. The tears went down and dripped off his chin onto the stone, and his hands stayed behind his back, and nobody in that vault moved or spoke or looked away, because the three goblins had each in their long lives learned exactly when a debt could not be paid in gold, and this was one of those times, and the only currency that would do was to stand still and let the boy be, for 1 minute, the child his mother had died trying to protect. Never Petunia, she had written, pressing hard enough to tear the page. I'm writing it in my own hand so that no one can pretend I did not mean it, and someone had pretended anyway. Someone had read these words because somebody had read them. The purple seal proved that somebody had been in this box and had closed the will and pressed their own seal over hers and carried her son to the one doorstep in all the world she had begged in torn ink that he never be left on. Harry stopped crying. He did it the way he did everything all at once, by deciding to. He wiped his face on his shoulder because his hands were still behind his back, and he straightened, and when he spoke his voice did not shake, and Ironclaw, who was watching, saw the thing happen in the boy that he had seen happen in very few men and never in a child. He saw grief turn without passing through rage directly into purpose and set like iron cooling into a shape that would not bend again. There are 2 letters left, Harry said. Aren't there, at the bottom, one in each hand? Yes, said Sharptongue quietly. Bograd has copied them. You may read them whenever you wish. You do not have to read them now. I'll read them now. His father's letter was short, and it was the kind of short that a man writes when he is pretending he has all the time in the world and knows that he does not. Harry, if you're reading this, then the worst happened, and I'm sorry, kid. I'm sorry I'm a letter instead of a dad. I had a whole life planned where I taught you to fly a broom, and your mother pretended to disapprove, and we drove her mad together, and I'm furious that I don't get it, so let me be furious for 1 line and then I'll be brave for the rest. There, done, brave now. Here, what I need you to know, and I need you to know it more than anything I've left you in any vault. You were wanted. God, you were wanted. Your mother and I tried for you and waited for you, and the day you were born I cried like an idiot in front of 3 very judgmental healers, and I'd do it again. Whatever they tell you about us, whatever the world says happened, and the world is going to say a great deal, because it turns out we got famous in a way I'd give back in a heartbeat. You hold on to that one true thing under all the noise. You were wanted from before you existed by 2 people who would have given anything and did. Be kind. It's the only thing that turned out to matter. Be braver than is sensible, but not braver than is kind. And for the love of everything, when you're old enough, ask Sirius about the time your mother hexed me into the lake. Ask him in front of her. It'll be the best day of your life. I love you. I'm out of time and I've still got so much to say, and that's going to be true no matter how long this letter is, so I'll just say the truest part. I'm glad it was you. Out of every possible son, I'm glad it was you. Dad Harry read it once and kept it forever, and that was the only mercy in the whole vault that night, that he would never lose a word of it, that his father's voice would be his to call up whole for the rest of his life, in a way that no seal and no lyre and no purple wax could ever take back. His mother's letter was longer, and it was not brave at all. It was afraid and clear-eyed, and it was the most useful thing anyone had ever handed him. And Harry understood by the 3rd line that his mother had been, of the 2 of them, the one who saw what was coming, not the murder. She could not have known the night and the hour, but the after. She had seen the after. My darling boy, she wrote, your father has told you that you were wanted, and it is true, and I won't waste my page repeating what he has said better. I'm going to use mine for something else. I'm going to use it to warn you because I am your mother, and a mother's last gift to a child she cannot raise is to tell him the truth about the world he'll have to raise himself in. There is a great man in our world. Everyone says so, and they are right. He is great, and he is good, and he has done more for the side of the light than any other living soul, and I would trust him with my life. I have trusted him with my life. His name is Albus Dumbledore, and you will meet him, and you will be told by him and by everyone that he loves you and acts for your good, and he will believe it. That is what I need you to understand, my love, because it is the most dangerous thing about him. He will not lie to you. He will mean every word. But he is a man who has decided that he can see further than anyone else, and that the seeing gives him the right to arrange the lives of smaller people for a good they're too small to understand. He calls it the greater good. He called it that to me once about something else, and I have not been able to forget the way he said it, as though the words settled a thing that had a person inside it. Harry, you are going to be, I think, a piece on his board. I don't know the whole shape of it. I know that there is a prophecy and that it touches you, and that a man who believes in a greater good and is handed a child who fits a prophecy will not be able to stop himself from arranging that child, however gently, however lovingly, toward the use he has decided the child is for. So here is what I ask, not what I command. Your father did the commanding, he's better at it. What I ask, do not let anyone make you a weapon. Not for a bad cause and not for a good one, especially not for a good one, because the good ones are how they get you. You are a person. You were a person before you were anything they need you to be, and you will be a person after, and your life is yours to spend and not theirs to spend for you. If a great and good man ever tells you that your suffering is necessary, that you must be placed somewhere unkind for your own protection, that the board requires the sacrifice of the smallest piece, You remember that your mother saw it coming and wrote it down and told you it was a lie. Protection that looks like a cage is a cage. Love that arranges you is not love. You get to choose. Whatever they tell you, you always, always get to choose. I have written into our will in my own hand the one place you must never be sent, and I have made it as plain as torn parchment can make a thing, and I am still afraid it will not be enough, because the people who will decide your future are powerful and certain, and I am only a frightened woman with a quill and not much time. So if it was not enough, if you are reading this from the wrong house, from a place I begged them not to send you, then know that it was not an accident, and it was not your fault, and it was not because nobody wanted you. You were wanted, you were stolen. There is a difference, and you deserve to know which one you are. Find the people we chose. They are good, and they loved us, and they will love you. And whatever you build out of the wreck we've left you, build it as yourself, on your own terms, in your own name. Or Harry, you were always going to be enough exactly as you are. I love you past the end of the world. Mum Harry knelt in the cold vault for a long time after Bograd's quill had stopped. The three goblins waited. None of them rushed him. At length Harry straightened and looked at the open box and the will lying in it untouched, his parents' words and his mother's torn warning in the two letters that were now his forever, copied in certified goblin ink and witnessed by the bank. "Close it," he said. "Seal it back up, leave the purple thing exactly where it is. I don't want it changed or moved or touched. I want it found by the right people in front of the right people exactly the way it is now, my mother's seal and his seal over it and his torn page warning underneath the thing he buried it with. I want them to have to look at both at the same time." He stood. "Evidence, you said, don't tidy the evidence." Sharptongue made a sound of deep approval. Bograd sealed the certified copy with the bank's own mark and rolled it, and handed it not to Harry but to Ironclaw, because a document like that does not travel in a child's pocket. It travels in the keeping of the bank, and Ironclaw took it as though it were made of edged glass. They left the strongbox sealed, the red wax split in the purple wax hole above it, and rode the cart back up through the breathing dark. Harry did not speak until they reached the high, small room. Then he sat on the edge of the bed with actual blankets, and he looked at Ironclaw and Sharptongue, and the thing that had set in him down in the vault, the iron cooling into a shape that would not bend, was plain now on his face, and it was not a child's face while it lasted. "My mother named 4 guardians," he said. "A godfather first, and there was no second choice while he was alive and free. Then the Longbottoms, then Remus Lupin, then the House of Bones. 4 households that would have taken me, that wanted me, and instead I went to the one she tore the page begging them to avoid." He looked from one goblin to the other. "So I have 4 questions, and they're the whole case, and I want to answer them in order. Where is Sirius Black? Because if he was alive and free, the will says I was his, and nobody had the right to send me anywhere else. What happened to the Longbottoms? Where is Remus Lupin? And why did Amelia Bones, an honest woman in a city of liars, never come for a child her own court had on record as half hers to keep?" He took a breath. 4 people who should have come, and none of them did. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern, and a pattern has an author. Sharptongue had pushed a clean sheet of parchment across the table while the boy spoke, and a quill, and Harry took them without being asked and began, then and there, to build the thing the case would stand on, not the emotion of it, which he had set down in the vault, but the structure. He wrote his 4 questions at the head of the sheet. Beneath each he wrote what the will itself established as fact, that Sirius Black was named first and absolutely, that the Longbottoms and Lupin and Bones were named after in order, that Petunia Dursley was forbidden in his mother's own torn hand, that the seat was not to be voted by proxy. Then he drew a second column, and at the head of it he wrote the single word contradicted by, and left it empty, because he did not yet know what filled it, only that something must, that for every plain wish on the parchment there was a fact in the world that violated it, and that the violations, lined up beside the wishes, would be the whole of the crime made visible on a single page. "You are making a ledger," Sharptongue observed, watching the boy work. "Wishes in one column, their betrayals. The gap between them totted up is the debt," something that was almost pride moved in the old goblin's voice. "That is precisely how the bank keeps its accounts of wrong, cupboard child. We did not teach it to you. You arrived already knowing it. I find that the single most interesting fact about you, and I have catalogued a great many." "It's the only way I know how to think," Harry said, not looking up, filling in what he could. "You write down what's supposed to be true, and you write down what's actually true, and wherever the two don't match, that's where somebody did something to you. I've been doing it since I was 4. I just never had anything worth writing down before." He set the quill down and turned the sheet so the goblins could read it, the orderly, terrible accounting of a dead family's wishes against the world that had broken every one of them. "There, that's the case on one page before we've even named who did it. 4 wishes, 4 betrayals, 1 boy in the gap. Tomorrow we put the names in the empty column, but the shape's already true, isn't it? The shape was true the moment I read the will. All we're doing now is finding out who to send the bill to." Sharptongue took the sheet and read it, and did not correct a single line, and set it carefully atop the certified copy as though the two belonged together, which Harry understood they now did. "Yes," said Sharptongue softly, and his old yellow eyes were bright, "it does." And tomorrow, cupboard child, we are going to read you a single line, dated the 5th of November, 1981, signed in 2 hands, and you are going to learn the author's name. One thing first, Sharptongue said before the boy could go up to his bed, and he drew a single old volume from the stack at his elbow. You said your father named Black his godfather in the old way with the old magic. You read it as a flourish. It is not a flourish. Master of Testaments, I know exactly what those words bind. He opened the book to a page of script even Harry could not yet read. A godfather sworn in the old way is not a sentiment. It is a magical oath, registered in the deep magic, witnessed at the child's christening, a binding as real as a blood seal in which a man pledges his protection and his guardianship to a child, and the magic itself holds him to it. It cannot be undone by a court. It cannot be overruled by a ministry. It can be ended only by the godfather's death, or his betrayal of the child, or the child's own choice at majority. His yellow eyes glinted. Do you understand what this means for your case, cupboard child? It means that when Albus Dumbledore set aside your father's will and sent you elsewhere, he did not merely ignore a written wish. He overrode a standing magical oath, one that the deep magic still recognizes this very night, because Sirius Black is not dead, and whatever they convicted him of without trial has not been proven to have betrayed you. The oath holds. In the eyes of the oldest magic there is, you have been your godfather's charge every single day you spent in that cupboard, and every one of those days was a day a ministry kept a sworn guardian from the child he was magically bound to protect. That is not in any wizard's statute. It is older than their statutes, and their statutes know it, and it will frighten them more than the ledger's will, because a wizard can argue with a law. No one argues with the deep magic and wins. Harry stood very still in the greenlit chamber and felt the shape of it settle into place, that the bond between himself and the man in the prison was not a clause that had been broken but a living thing that had been obstructed, and that the obstruction was, by the oldest reckoning there was, its own continuing crime. Then the oath is a witness too, he said slowly. A witness that can't lie, can't forget, and can't be intimidated because it isn't a person. It's the magic itself still holding Sirius to me after 6 years on a rock. We don't just have ledgers and mouths, we have the deep magic on the stand. He looked at the old goblin. Write that into the brief, Sharptongue, right at the top, before the gold, before the votes. A sworn guardian was kept 6 years from his charge. Let them argue with the oldest magic there is. It is already written, said Sharptongue with deep satisfaction, and closed the book. Harry lay down that night in the first decent bed of his life. With his father's I'm glad it was you, and his mother's you were stolen. There is a difference held whole and unbreakable in the part of him that never lost anything, and he did not sleep for a long while, and when at last he did, he slept without fear, because for the first time he was not the only one who knew the truth, and the people who shared it with him were the most relentless creditors in the world. And the man who had stolen him had finally, after 6 quiet years, run up a debt that someone intended to collect. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Who buried it? The ledger was opened to the 5th of November when Harry came down to the green chamber in the morning, and Sharptongue had not slept. Harry could tell because the old goblin had the particular stillness of a creature that has spent the night with a thing it hates, and because there were 4 ledgers open now instead of 1, and a great roll of statute unspooled across the table and held flat at its corners by ink pots, and a slate covered edge to edge in Sharptongue's cramped figures. The Master of Testaments had been at war all night with a single line of writing, and he had the look of a general who has finally found the gap in the wall. Sit, Sharptongue said. You can read our hand now. Read me that line. Harry climbed onto the chair and leaned over the ledger, and he read it slowly, because 4 days ago the looping script had been a wall, and now it was only difficult, and difficult was a thing he had decided to be unafraid of. 5 Nov 1981. Entry to Vault 687 Potter by external authority. 1 seal affixed. Office of the Chief Warlock. Emergency powers. Document within testamentary, blood-sealed, ordered, closed against execution and against heir correspondence. Witnessed under protest by the bank. Signatories: APWB Dumbledore, Chief Warlock of the Wisengamot, DJ Umbridge, Clerk, Wisengamot Administration Services. Harry read the 2 names and felt the cold place at the back of his neck go all the way down his spine. He had known one of them was coming. His mother had written it on a sheet of parchment now sealed in a vault below him. His name is Albus Dumbledore, and he is great, and he is good, and he will mean every word, and so the first name landed not as a shock but as a confirmation, which was somehow worse, because a confirmation is a thing you cannot pretend you misread. Albus Dumbledore, Harry said, the great and good man, he's the one who sealed it. He looked up. Who's the second name? That, said Sharptongue, and his voice acquired a particular dryness it had not had before, is the more interesting question, cupboard child, because the first name is the one everyone would expect, and the second is the one that does the work. Albus Dumbledore signed this as Chief Warlock, the head of your High Court, a man whose signature opens most doors in your world simply by existing. But a Chief Warlock does not carry his own files. He does not stamp his own entries or fill his own ledgers or post his own redirections. He has people for that. He has a clerk. The pointed nail came down on the second name. Dollars Jane Umbridge, in 1981, a junior clerk in Wisengamot Administration Services, the office that does the paperwork of your high court, the hand that actually moved the parts. He sat back. Dumbledore is the authority on this page. Umbridge is the mechanism. And mechanisms, Heir Potter, leave fingerprints in places authorities never think to look, because authorities believe the work beneath them is beneath noticing. I have spent the night noticing it. Would you like to see what a clerk leaves behind when she thinks no one will ever audit a dead family's account? Yes, said Harry. Show me all of it, in order. Sharptongue showed him all of it in order, and it took the whole of the morning, and by the end of it Harry understood that he was not looking at a single crime but at a machine, a small, quiet 6-year machine built out of paperwork, that had turned a grieving country's reverence for one great man into a set of levers that a clerk could pull in the dark. The first lever was the statute. They sealed the will under the Emergency Powers Act of 1981, Sharptongue said, and he tapped the unspooled roll. It sounds unanswerable, emergency powers, in a war who argues with emergency powers, but a statute is not a spell, cupboard child. A statute means exactly what its words say and not 1 inch more, and these words, his nail ran down a clause, were written for one purpose. Read it. Harry read it. The Emergency Powers Act of 1981 granted the Chief Warlock the authority, during a declared state of war, to seal and seize property, premises, and instruments believed to be in the service of or under the control of the enemy. Houses where Death Eaters met, vaults that funded them, the wands and dark instruments of the captured. It's for catching the enemy's things, Harry said slowly. Their hideouts, their money, their weapons. He looked up. It's not for wills. It is not for wills, Sharptongue agreed. It says instruments in the service of the enemy. Your parents' testament was the instrument of 2 people the enemy murdered. By no reading in any language is the last wish of a murdered war hero an instrument in the service of the man who murdered her. There is no clause here that touches a private testament. There is no clause here that touches an heir's correspondence. They reached for the biggest, frighteningest law in the book because no one would dare question a thing sealed under it during a war, and they applied it to a document it does not cover. On the gamble, a good gamble, it is held for 6 years, that grief and reverence would keep anyone from reading the law closely enough to notice it never fit. He bared his teeth. I have read it closely. It never fit. The seal is unlawful on its face. That is finding number 1, and it is the foundation everything else stands on, and they built it on sand because they never believed anyone would dig. And the war's over, Harry said. It ended the night my parents died, so even the part of the law that's real requires a declared state of war, which was lifted by the ministry within the month, Sharptongue finished, and there was something almost gleeful in his hatred now. So even had the seal been lawful when it was placed, and it was not, it would have lapsed with the emergency that justified it 6 years ago, and become a dead letter that no one renewed, because renewing it would have meant filing it where someone might read it. They did not seal your parents' will under a law. They sealed it under the memory of a law, and propped the memory up with the fact that the great Albus Dumbledore's name was on it, and dared the world to look twice. He rolled the statute up. Finding number 1, the seal has no legal basis and never did. Now, the mail. The mail was the second lever, and the mail was where Harry stopped being merely interested and became, in a way that would have frightened the Dursleys had they been able to see it, engaged. You sent 6 summonses, Harry said. 1 a year for the reckoning. I never got them. You assumed Vernon burned them, muggles burning a magic letter, easy answer, but you don't believe that anymore. You've been up all night because the easy answer's wrong. The easy answer is wrong, Sharptongue confirmed. Watch. He laid out 6 entries from one of the ledgers, each a dispatch record, summons to heir, House of Potter, reckoning returned, and beside each, a second line in fainter ink. Every summons the bank sends is charmed to record where it ends, where it is opened or burned or lost. A burned letter records a hearth. A lost letter records a ditch. Look where these 6 recorded. Harry looked. 6 summonses, 6 years, and beside each, the same destination, written in the faint recording ink, received and redirected, Office of Wisengamot Administration Services, by Standing Order 5 Nov 1981. They never went to Privet Drive, Harry said. The cold was all the way down him now, and it had stopped being cold and started being something steadier and more useful. Vernon never burned anything. The letters left here addressed to me, and a standing order, placed the same day as the seal, the 5th of November, caught every one of them before it ever reached Surrey and routed it to her office. 6 years, 6 letters, all of them sitting in Umbridge's files or in her fire, and not one of them ever got within 40 miles of me. He looked up. She didn't just seal the will. She built a net to catch any letter that might lead me back to it. Anything from the bank, anything with my name and my real address, the cupboard, you said the first one knew the cupboard, gets caught in the net and disappears. That's not protecting a child, that's not even hiding a will, that's hiding me from my own bank on purpose for 6 years. Yes, said Sharptongue softly. Finding number 2. The redirection order is the proof that this was not a single act of wartime caution that everyone simply forgot to undo. It was maintained. Someone renewed the wards on that net year after year so that the boy would stay lost. A thing you forget does not catch 6 letters across 6 years. A thing you tend does. He drew a careful line on his slate, connecting the seal to the order. And the hand that tended it, the hand on the standing order, renewed in her own ink in 82, 84, and 86, is the second signature. Umbridge. Dumbledore sealed the will once, and I will wager has not thought about the mechanism since. Great men set a thing in motion and trust the motion. The clerk kept the machine oiled, which raises the question that kept me awake. He turned his yellow eyes on Harry. Why would a junior clerk care so much for so long about one lost orphan that she would tend a net for 6 years? Authority does these things for principle. Clerks do these things for money, Harry said. Sharptongue smiled with all his teeth. Open the third ledger cupboard, child. You found it before I finished the sentence. Let us see how right you are. He was right. The third lever was money, and it was the smallest of the three and the one Harry hated most, because the seal could be excused as zeal and the net as overcaution, but the money could not be excused as anything but what it was. The frozen Potter estate, sealed against execution, still had to be administered. Someone had to be on record as managing the property that no one was allowed to touch. And the office on record, by the same standing order of the 5th of November, was Wisengamot Administration Services, Umbridge's office. And an administered estate, under a dusty subclause of ministry procedure, could be charged a stewardship administration fee, a small percentage, quarterly, for the trouble of overseeing assets in legal limbo. She's been billing my dead parents' estate, Harry said, for the work of keeping me away from it, quarterly, for 6 years. Small sums, small enough that no single charge would draw an eye, which is the whole art of it. Sharptongue ran a claw down the column of identical modest figures. A clerk's salary does not make a person rich. A clerk who has quietly attached her office to the administration of a vaulted estate and bills it 4 times a year for the privilege of the very neglect she is committing, becomes comfortable indeed, and stays that way for as long as the estate stays frozen. Which gives our Madam Umbridge a reason far older and far baser than protection to want the boy who lived to stay exactly where he is. A frozen estate is an income. An unfrozen one is the end of an income and the beginning of an audit. His smile was gone now. She has been paid, heir Potter, out of your father's gold for the labor of robbing you of your father's gold. There is a word for this in the law of every people who have ever kept gold, yours and mine alike, and the word is embezzlement. And unlike the seal, which can hide behind a great man's good intentions, embezzlement has no intention it can hide behind. It is the one finding on this table that nothing can wash, finding number 3, and it belongs to her alone. Harry sat very still for a moment. That's the crack, he said. Sharptongue's old eyes sharpened. Explain. Dumbledore's the authority. His name, S on the seal, his name's the reason nobody looked. But everything he did, he can dress up as protection, the great good man who sealed a will and hid a boy for the boy's own safety, and he believes it. My mother said he'd believe it, so he'll sound like he believes it, and a lot of people will believe him back. Harry leaned forward. But Umbridge can't dress up the money. There's no version of I build the orphan's estate for keeping him from it that sounds like protection. So she's the weak point. If this ever comes to a fight, and it's going to come to a fight, you and I both know it's going to come to a fight, she's the one who breaks first, because she's the one with a crime she can't make noble. You don't aim at the authority, you aim at the mechanism. The mechanism has a price on its head and knows it. The Master of Testaments looked at the 7-year-old across the table for a moment that stretched. 240 years, he said. I have prepared cases for the courts of wizards and watched grown advocates miss in an afternoon what you have found in a morning, that you do not break a conspiracy at its strongest point. You break it at its most ashamed. Umbridge is the ashamed point. He set down his quill. There is a 4th thing. I have saved it for last, not because it is the smallest, but because it is the one that will tell you what the seal was truly for, and it is the one I think that will frighten you, and I would rather frighten you when you are sitting down and the door is shut. Show me, Harry said. The 4th lever was the seat. Your parents wrote it into the will, Sharptongue said. You read it and your neck went cold and you did not know why. I will tell you why. The Potter seat on the Wisengamot is an old vote, older than most, weighted heavier than most, one of a handful of voices in your high court that can turn a close question. Your parents knew exactly what it was worth, which is why they wrote in James Potter's own hand that it was not to be voted by any proxy, regent, or guardian save by the express written consent of the guardian named below. They had watched the votes of the dead and the absent be spent in that war. They were determined that their son's voice would not be spent for him. He drew the 4th ledger close. It was spent for him anyway. He opened it, and Harry saw a column of dates, year on year, and beside each date a single word cast. 47 times, Sharptongue said quietly. In the 6 years since your parents died, the Potter seat has been voted 47 times, every one of them by proxy, in defiance of the will that forbade it, and every one of them by the same hand, recorded with the Wisengamot Administration Office that holds the proxy. The hand that holds your seat, heir Potter, and has held it for 6 years, and has spent your family's heavy old vote 47 times on questions your parents never authorized any soul to spend it on, is the same hand that sealed the will so that no one could read the clause forbidding exactly this. He let that sit. Albus Dumbledore is not merely the chief warlock who presides over the Wisengamot, he leads a block within it. And one of the votes in that block for 6 years has been yours, held in trust by the man who sealed away the document that says he was never allowed to touch it. The seal did not only hide a boy, it freed a vote, your vote, for him to spend. The green chamber was silent. Harry sat with his hands flat on the table this time, not behind his back, because there was nothing here to steal. The stealing had already been done, years ago, in offices and chambers far above this one, by men and clerks who had decided that a dead family's wishes and a living boy's life were resources to be allocated. "So that's the whole shape of it," he said at last, and his voice was level, and Sharptongue would tell Ironclaw later that it was the levelness that had unsettled him most, because rage he could have understood in a child, but this was not rage, this was a boy summing. He sealed the will, 4 reasons stacked. 1, he raised a finger. The will named 4 guardians and forbade the Dursleys, and he wanted me at the Dursleys, for some reason of his own that we don't have yet, so the will had to disappear. 2, hiding the will meant hiding me, and a hidden boy is a controllable boy, and he had a use for me. The prophecy my mother warned me about, the boy who lived, the war that everyone thinks isn't really over. 3, a frozen estate is an income, so his clerk had a private reason to keep the machine running long after he'd stopped thinking about it, which is why it never decayed. And 4, a sealed will freed a heavy vote on his own court, and he spent it 47 times. He lowered his hand. 4 motives, 2 men sharing the work, 1 for power and conviction, 1 for money, and 1 orphan parked in a cupboard at the dead center of it, told every day that nobody wanted him, so he'd never grow up to ask the one question that brings the whole thing down. He looked up. "Did I miss anything?" "You missed nothing," said Sharptongue. "You have in a single morning assembled the case that I have spent 6 years assembling the pieces of without daring to assemble the whole, because the whole has a name on it that no goblin alive wished to write down without a client to write it for. Now I have a client." He rolled the ledgers closed, one by one. "There is a name for what we have built this morning, Heir Potter. In the courts of wizards it is called a brief. It is the skeleton of an accusation, true in every joint, that can be carried into a court and made to stand up and walk. We have the skeleton. We do not yet have everything that hangs on it. We do not have the 4 guardians. We do not have a living mouth to swear to a single word, and a skeleton with no flesh and no breath does not win in a wizard's court, no matter how true its bones. But we have the bones. And the bones say Albus Dumbledore and Dolar's Umbridge, and they say it in their own ink in our ledgers, witnessed under protest by a bank that does not forget. Then we get the flesh," Harry said, "the 4 guardians, where they went, what was done to them, because every one of them is a mouth that can swear to a piece of this, and 4 mouths is a chorus, and a chorus is a thing even a great man can't talk over." He slid off the chair. "I want to start with the first name. The one the will said there was no second choice while he was alive and free. I want to find Sirius Black. There is one thing more I want before we stop," Harry said, "and it's the thing that turns 4 crimes into one. The timing, you keep saying the 5th of November, the seal, the net, the standing order, all the 5th. I want to know everything that happened that one day in order, hour by hour, if your ledgers keep hours. Because if it was all one day, then it wasn't 4 decisions. It was one operation." Sharptongue's yellow eyes gleamed, and he drew the ledgers close again, because this was precisely the kind of request that made 240 years of dry work worth doing. They reconstructed the day together, the old goblin and the boy, entry by entry, and what they assembled was not the messy record of a man improvising in grief, but the clean, sequenced record of a plan. The seal had gone on to the vault first in the morning. The redirection order for the heir's correspondence followed within the hour, from the same office, in the same hand. The stewardship fee arrangement was registered by midday. Sharptongue went very still as he found it, on a separate page in a separate ledger, the one that tracked the bank's awareness of ministry detentions. On that same afternoon, the 5th of November, the emergency detention order against Sirius Black had been renewed and made indefinite, its earlier provisional status converted to permanent, with no trial scheduled and the trial requirement formally waived under the same emergency powers that sealed the will. "All one day," Harry said quietly. "The will sealed in the morning, my mail rerouted by noon, the fee set up at midday, and the godfather's cell made permanent that same afternoon. 4 things one day, 2 signatures running through all of it." He sat back. "Nobody does 4 unrelated things to one family in one day by accident. You seal the will so nobody reads that Sirius gets me. You make Sirius's cell permanent so he can't object that he should have me. You reroute my mail so I can never find out either thing. And you set up the fee so the clerk who runs the machine gets paid to keep it running. It's not 4 crimes that happen to land in the same week. It's one machine switched on in a single day, 11 days after my parents wrote the will it was built to bury." He looked up. "That's the keystone, Sharptongue. A jury can doubt one signature on one page. They can't doubt a whole machine assembled in 8 hours by the same 2 hands. The date is the proof of the intent. Put put the timeline on a single sheet. One day, 4 moves, make them look at the clock. It will be the first exhibit they see, Sharptongue promised, and the last thing they are able to forget. It was at exactly that moment that the door of the green chamber opened, and Ironclaw came in, and his face was the face of a goblin carrying news he did not like, and Harry understood, before the keeper of the account said a single word, that the machine they had spent the morning taking apart had just, somewhere far above them, begun to notice that one of its parts was missing. 2 things, Ironclaw said, shutting the door. And you will not like either, so I will give you both at once and let you decide which you dislike more. He set a single sheet on the table. It bore the ministry crest and the green ink hand of an official letter, and Harry read it upside down before Ironclaw had finished sitting. To the keeper of the account of the House of Potter, Gringotts. It has been brought to the attention of Wisengamot Administration Services that an irregular access was recently made to a sealed estate under this office's administration. You are reminded that the said estate remains under the lawful seal of the Chief Warlock, and that any disturbance of its contents, correspondence, or status is to be reported to this office without delay. We trust no such disturbance has occurred. D.J. Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary, on behalf of the office. She knows, Harry said. She knows something, Ironclaw corrected. When you triggered the reckoning, when the law of your 7th year forced us to open that box to prepare your accounting, it sent a notice into the Ministry's own records automatically, as such things do. She did not see you. She did not see the will read. She saw a single line in a register telling her that the Potter estate, frozen and forgotten and quietly profitable for 6 years, had stirred. And a clerk who has been embezzling from a sleeping estate does not like to learn the estate has begun to dream. His mouth thinned. She has written to remind us that the seal is lawful in the hope that we are still the careful bank that has spent 6 years pretending it might be. She does not yet know that the careful bank has acquired a client and a brief and a reason to stop pretending. She is fishing. She is also frightened. You were right about her, Heir Potter. The mechanism breaks first. It has already begun to rattle. And the second thing, Ironclaw was quiet for a moment, and that was how Harry knew the second thing was the worst one. When you walked out of that garden a week ago, the keeper said, you walked out of more than a garden. There were protections on that house, old blood magic, woven through your aunt's roof, the kind that is anchored to a living relative's blood and a child's residence under it. I did not understand their full shape until last night, when Sharptongue and I compared what we had found, and I will not pretend to understand it wholly now. But I understand this much: those wards were not the bank's, and they were not your parents'. They were placed by a third hand on the same authority in the same week as the seal, and they were monitored. Someone built an instrument that watches those wards and is warned when they weaken, and they weaken when the child who anchors them is removed from the house. He looked at Harry. You have been out of that house for a week. The instrument that watches has, for a week, been ringing. Whoever said it knows by now that the boy who lived has left Privet Drive. He does not know where you have gone. These walls are old, and goblin stone does not answer wizard charms, and inside Gringotts you are as invisible to his instruments as you were visible the moment you stepped past the hedge. But he knows you are gone. And a man who built a watching instrument around a hidden boy did not build it for nothing. He built it because the day the boy moved was a day he intended to know about and act on. Harry looked at the 2 letters worth of trouble on the table, the clerk's careful fishing line, the keeper's warning of an alarm ringing in some high tower across London, and he found, examining himself, that he was not afraid. He had expected to be afraid, and he was not, and he turned the absence over and understood it. The machine had run for 6 years on the certainty that the boy at its center would never know. That certainty was gone now. Knowing was the whole of his advantage, and they did not yet know that he knew, and that gap, the gap between his knowledge and theirs, was a thing he could stand in and work for exactly as long as he was careful. Then we have a clock, Harry said. Dumbledore knows I'm gone, but not where. Umbridge knows the estate stirred, but not why. They'll move separately at first, because one's chasing a boy and the other's protecting a fee, and they don't know yet how much the other has to lose. We use that. Find the 4 guardians and put flesh on the brief before the 2 of them compare notes and realize they have to bury this together or hang together. He looked at Ironclaw. How fast can the bank find a man? Specifically, how fast can the bank find out what happened to Sirius Black, Godfather, first guardian, the one the will says I belonged to from the start? Because that's the loudest mouth in the chorus, and the will says there was no lawful reason I went anywhere else while he was alive and free. He paused, and something in him had already half-guessed the answer, the way he half-guessed most things, from the shape of the silence around them. And I've got a feeling, Ironclaw, that the reason I didn't go to him is its own crime sitting right next to this one. Because a man doesn't get passed over for being inconvenient. A man gets passed over for being unavailable. And I want to know what made the one person my parents trusted most unavailable, 11 days after they wrote his name first. Ironclaw and Sharptongue exchanged a glance over the boy's head, and in it was the same conversation they had been having in glances for a week. He is 7, and he is already 3 moves ahead of where we feared to stand, and Ironclaw answered the question Harry had not quite asked. The bank can find what happened to Sirius Black by tomorrow, he said. I can tell you part of it now because every goblin who handles the high accounts knows it, and you will not have heard it because no one ever let you hear anything. Sirius Black is not dead, Heir Potter. He is not free either. He let the words settle into the greenlit quiet. He is in Azkaban. He has been there since the week your parents died, and in 6 years he has never once stood trial. The chamber was very still. Never tried, Harry repeated. The first guardian. The one there was no second choice while he was free. He's in a prison, 6 years, no trial. He sat back down slowly because this was not a thing to receive standing. That's not a coincidence sitting next to the seal. That's the same crime. If he was tried and convicted, fine, that's a tragedy and an inconvenience, and the wool moves to the next name. But no trial means nobody ever proved he couldn't have me. Nobody ever proved anything. They just put him somewhere the same week where he couldn't object, and then they sealed the will so nobody could read that he was supposed to have me, and then they sent me to the one house my mother tore the page forbidding. Harry's hands were flat on the table and very still. Tomorrow. Everything the bank can find about how Sirius Black ended up in a cell with no trial in the same week my parents died and my will got buried. Because I don't think those are 3 crimes, Ironclaw. I think they're one. And I think it has the same author. Tomorrow, Ironclaw promised, and it was an oath, and a goblin's oath is the only currency they do not counterfeit. Across London, in a circular office at the top of a tower of moving stairs, an old man stood at a window and did not sleep either. The office was full of soft sounds, the whir and tick and faint silver breath of 100 delicate instruments, each one spun glass and turning gears, each one watching some thread of the world the old man had decided was worth the watching. Most of them he no longer truly heard, the way one stops hearing a clock, but one of them, a slender thing of silver on a spindle-legged table near the window, had changed its note 8 days ago, and he had heard nothing else since. It had been humming a low, steady, contented note for 6 years. It was anchored by magic of his own devising to the wards that wrapped a house in Surrey, wards that drew their strength from the oldest and rarest protection his long life had ever seen, the sacrifice of a mother's love, carried in the blood of her son, and renewed each time that son called a relative's roof his home. For 6 years the instrument had told him in its contented hum that the boy was where the boy needed to be, behind walls no follower of Voldemort could breach, growing up plain and unremarkable and safe until the day the world would need him to be more. 8 days ago the hum had thinned. 2 days ago it had begun, faintly, to fail. The boy had left Privet Drive. Albus Dumbledore stood at the window with his hands folded into his sleeves and turned the problem over with the patience of a man who had outlived most problems, and he did not yet permit himself to feel the cold thing waiting underneath the patience, which was fear. He had told no one of the boy's circumstances, not Minerva, who had argued with him on that very street 6 years ago and had never been told she'd lost the argument, not the Order, not anyone whose love for the child might have led them to undo, out of mere tenderness, the protection he had built out of harder stuff than tenderness. He had carried it alone because the things that mattered most were always the things one carried alone, and because he had learned, across a long and terrible life, that affection was the lever by which good people were turned to ruinous ends, and so he had locked his own affection in a box and built a wall of Surrey brick around the boy and called it, to himself, in the dark, the only word that made it bearable, necessary. And now the boy was gone, and the wards were failing, and Albus Dumbledore did not know where in the wide and dangerous world the most important child of the age had wandered off to. There were no signs of struggle. The watchers he kept on the street had reported nothing. The Dursleys, questioned gently and obliviated gently afterward, recalled only that the boy had been in the garden and then somehow had not. No violence, no abduction he could trace. The child had simply walked out of the safest place in Britain, and the safest place in Britain had let him. And that troubled the old man more than an abduction would have, because an abduction had an enemy at the end of it, and an enemy was a thing he knew how to fight. A boy who left on his own was a thing he did not know how to fight, because you could not outplan a child's own will without becoming the very thing you were protecting him from. Where have you gone, Harry? The old man murmured to the failing silver hum, and the instrument did not answer, and he turned from the window at last and began, in the small hours, to write the careful letters that would set quiet people looking in quiet places. Not the Aurors, not yet, for the Aurors meant questions, and questions meant the careful architecture of 6 years might be glimpsed by eyes he could not control. Only his own, only the ones who trusted him enough not to ask why. He would find the boy, and he would return the boy to safety, and he would do it gently, lovingly, and entirely without the boy's consent, because the boy was 7 and could not possibly understand what stood in the dark beyond the failing wards, waiting with the patience of something that had been destroyed but not, the old man was nearly certain, ended. It did not occur to Albus Dumbledore that night to wonder whether the boy had gone somewhere on purpose. It did not occur to him that a child raised in a cupboard might have learned to read, or to think, or to ask the one question no one had ever wanted him to ask. He had built his whole architecture on the certainty that the boy would never know. great men so often do. In a far less lofty office, 3 floors below the level of the street and lit by a single lamp she had not trusted the building's house elves to tend, Dolores Umbridge was not sleeping because she was burning things. She had received the automatic notice 4 days ago, a single gray line in the weekly register of the estates her office administered, reporting that Vault 687, House of Potter, frozen and silent and reliably lucrative since the autumn she had been a junior clerk, had registered an access of record. She had read it 3 times, and then she had smiled her soft, wide smile at no one, and then she had begun, very quietly, to make certain things ready to disappear. She did not know what had happened. She suspected nothing so grand as the truth. She had no idea a child sat at the heart of it asking questions, and she would have laughed her little laugh at the suggestion. What Dolores Umbridge knew was simpler and entirely sufficient to frighten her. A frozen estate that paid her 4 times a year had stirred, and stirring estates drew audits, and audits drew eyes, and her comfortable arrangement, the quarterly fee, the standing order, the tidy 6-year river of someone else's gold, would not survive a single honest eye looking at it from the right angle. So she burned the correspondence she could spare and warded the ledgers she could not, and she wrote a soft, polite, perfectly deniable letter to the goblins reminding them that the seal was lawful, fishing to learn how much they knew. And she made a note in the cramped private hand she used for the things she would deny ever writing, to find out at once which Wisengamot member's name was attached to the Potter proxy. Because if the estate was waking, then the man who had been spending the Potter vote for 6 years had a great deal more to lose than she did, and a frightened clerk's surest protection had always been to make certain that, when the eyes finally came, they fell first on someone far too important to be allowed to fall. She did not yet know the important man's name was Albus Dumbledore. When she learned it the next morning, she would feel something she had not felt in years, which was hope, the particular hope of the small and the guilty, who understand that the safest place to hide a crime is in the shadow of a much larger one. The two of them, the great man in his high tower and the small woman in her low office, were not yet allies. They did not yet know they would have to be. But the machine they had built between them, one for conviction and one for coin, had begun, separately, in the same dark, to feel itself watched and to move. Harry went up to the high, small room that night with 4 ledgers, worth of a buried machine laid out clear in the part of him that lost nothing, and a name at the top of it that his own mother had warned him would mean every word he said. He lay in the dark and listened to the great old bank breathe around him, invisible and unanswering to the instruments that were, even now, ringing in some high tower across the sleeping city, and he thought about a man named Sirius Black who had stood at his christening and sworn an old oath over him, and then vanished into a prison without a trial 11 days after a will named him first. I'm coming, Harry thought, to a man he had never met, in a place he had never seen. I don't know you yet. But you were the first name on the page, and the page was the truth, and I'm going to make them read it out loud. Then the boy who lived, who had spent 7 years being nobody, slept the sleep of someone who has finally been handed a problem worth the whole of his attention, and far above him the machine ground on and did not yet know that it was already coming apart. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, The Real Guardian's Ironclaw Kept His Oath. The report on Sirius Black was on the table before Harry had finished his breakfast, and it was thin, and the thinness was the worst thing about it. That is the whole of the official record, Ironclaw said, and you will notice what it does not contain. Harry read it. It did not take long because there was almost nothing there. On the 1st of November, 1981, the day after the Potters died, Sirius Black had been taken into custody on a street in a Muggle town, at the center of a blast that killed 12 Muggle bystanders and 1 wizard. The wizard was named Peter Pettigrew, and of him nothing remained but a finger. Black was charged with the betrayal of James and Lily Potter to Lord Voldemort, with the murder of Pettigrew, and with the deaths of the 12. Was committed to Azkaban by an order of emergency detention signed by Bartemius Crouch, Sr., then head of magical law enforcement, and that was all. There was no trial date, no record of a hearing, no transcript, no testimony, no verdict, no vote of the Wisengamot. A man had been named the worst traitor of the war and buried alive in the worst prison in Britain, and the paper that did it was 1 page long and had taken, by the look of it, an afternoon. No trial, Harry said. 6 years and nobody's ever proven a word of it, just an emergency detention order signed by Crouch the day after my parents died. He looked up. Emergency powers again, the same week, the same machinery. Somebody sealed the will under emergency powers, and somebody detained Sirius Black under emergency powers, and both of them did it in the days right after my parents died, when the whole country was so frightened and so grateful and so eager to be done with the war that nobody was going to demand the paperwork on the man everyone wanted to be guilty. He set the report down. It's the same crime, Ironclaw. I keep saying it, and it keeps being true. You make the boy disappear by sealing the will. You make the first guardian disappear by skipping his trial. 2 doors slammed in the same week, both with emergency powers, both before anyone had time to think. And then the boy goes to the one house the wolf forbade, and the godfather goes to a cell, and nobody ever has to explain either one because the war's over and everyone's just relieved. He went quiet for a moment, and there was a thing he had to say next that he turned over twice before he said it, because it mattered more than the rest. My father named Sirius Black first, Harry said. 11 days before he died. There is no second choice while Sirius lives and is free. We trust him before any living soul. That's not a man hedging, that's a man certain. And the report says Sirius betrayed them 10 or 11 days after my father wrote that. He shook his head once. Either my father, who hid his family from the most dangerous wizard alive, who was careful enough to make a blood-sealed will and lodge it in a goblin vault in the last weeks of his life. Either that man was so completely wrong about his best friend that the friend turned traitor inside 2 weeks of being named first guardian, and my father never suspected. Or my father was right and Sirius didn't betray anybody, and the man everyone wanted to be guilty was convenient in exactly the same way a sealed will was convenient and a cupboard was convenient. Harry looked at the goblins. I don't know which yet, but I know that a man who never got a trial is a man nobody ever had to prove anything about, and I've stopped believing in convenient things that happen in threes in the same week. Can I see him? Harry asked. Sirius. If he's the first guardian and he's alive, can I go to him? Ironclaw and Sharptongue traded a glance, and it was Ironclaw who answered, and he did not soften it. No, the keeper said, not yet and not lightly, and I will tell you plainly why, because you have asked plainly. Azkaban is not a prison in the way your muggle world keeps prisons. It is a fortress on a rock in the cold of the northern sea, and it is guarded by creatures called Dementors, and the Dementors do not need walls or locks because what they take from a prisoner is the will to want anything past the next gray minute. They feed on a person's happiness, they drink it. Stand near one and you will hear the worst thing that ever happened to you and feel nothing else. The prisoners of Azkaban do not escape because there is, after a year or two, nothing left in them that remembers wanting to. He let that land. A man held there 6 years is not a man who can be marched into a courtroom and asked to defend himself with wit and certainty. Whatever Sirius Black is now, he has spent 6 years in that on a charge no one ever proved, and the cruelty of it that they could have left a guilty man there and called it justice, but they left an untried man there and called it nothing at all is its own count against the people who did this, and I will see it written into the brief. Harry was quiet for a moment, and the green chamber seemed colder than it had. Then that's the clock under the clock, he said at last. Everything else can wait, the votes, the fee, the seal, their paper keeps. But every day Sirius is on that rock, those things are eating whatever's left of him for a crime he didn't commit. So when I said I wanted to do this thoroughly, I meant thoroughly, not slowly. There's a man dying of grief on a rock in the sea because my father trusted the wrong friend and the world buried the right one. I'm not going to be careful about that. He looked up. How fast can an investigation force a trial? That, said Sharptongue, depends entirely on who opens it, which is why. Then you will want, said Sharptongue from across the table, to ask the one living man who knew them all, your father, your mother, Sirius Black and Peter Pettigrew, the one your father named third, the one the world threw away for the accident of his blood, and who has therefore spent 6 years exactly as forgotten as you have, and exactly as easy to overlook. He slid a single sheet across the table. On it in the bank's recording ink was an address, a village in the West Country, a cottage, a name. Remus Lupin. We found him in a day, Heir Potter, because no one else has bothered to look for him in 6 years. He is poor and he is alone and he is the gentlest mouth in your chorus, and he believes, because the whole world told him so and gave him no will to read that said otherwise, that Sirius Black murdered his friends. The old goblin's yellow eyes held Harry's. You are about to give a grieving man back his dead and take away the story he has used to survive losing them, all in one afternoon. Be careful with him, not because he is fragile, because he is owed it. The cottage was the kind of poor that tries to be tidy and cannot quite afford it. It stood at the end of a rutted lane with a garden gone half to seed, and its thatch wanted mending, and the man who opened the door at Harry's knock was thin in the way that has nothing to do with build and everything to do with going without. He was younger than the gray in his hair claimed, and his robes had been good once and had been mended past the point where mending showed his care and into the point where it showed his need. And his face, when he looked down and found a 7-year-old boy on his doorstep flanked by 2 goblins in sharp gray suits, went through surprise and caution and then something Harry had not braced for, which was a kind of stricken recognition that hit the man like a blow. Merlin, Remus Lupin said softly. Merlin, you have James S. He stopped himself, and his hand had come halfway to the doorframe to hold it. You have your mother's eyes. People keep almost saying that, Harry said. You're the first one to finish it. He stood very straight on the doorstep because he had decided on the walk up the lane that he would not let this man feel sorry for him, that pity would close the door faster than rudeness. You're Remus Lupin. My father named you in his will. Third after Sirius Black and the Longbottoms. He wrote, and Harry had it whole, of course, he had everything whole. Remus has been my brother since I was 11 years old. The world treats him as a monster for an accident of his blood, and he is gentler than the whole of the world that fears him. Remus will raise my son to be kind, and there is no one I would trust more with that one task, and the law that forbids his kind from the keeping of children is a cowardly law, and I name him in its teeth." Harry watched the words go into the man and undo him by inches. "I'm Harry. I didn't know any of that until 8 days ago. I didn't know I had a father with a name and a will and a best friend until 8 days ago. I've come a long way to talk to you, Mr. Lupin, and some of what I have to say is going to hurt, and I'm sorry for that, but I think you've been lied to for 6 years almost as badly as I have, and I think you're owed the truth, and I'm the one who's got it." For a moment Remus Lupin stood in his doorway with his mended robes and his stricken face, and looked at the child who had just recited James Potter's hand back to him on a country lane, and then he stepped aside, and his voice when it came was rough. "You'd better come in," he said. "All of you. I haven't much, but what I have is yours." The inside of the cottage was one room, clean and bare, with a kettle and 2 chairs and a great many books stacked where furniture should have been, and Remus gave Harry the better chair and the goblins the worse one in a windowsill and stood himself, because there was nowhere left to sit, and Harry understood that the man had given away his entire household in the space of a sentence and not noticed doing it. Harry told him. He told it in order, the way he had learned to tell everything, because order was how you carried a true thing without dropping it. The letters that never came. The reckoning, the vault, the strongbox, the 2 seals, the will, read in the cold with his hands behind his back, the 4 guardians named in order, his mother's torn page, never Petunia, and the seal pressed over it 11 days after she wrote it. The 5th of November, Dumbledore, Umbridge, the statute that never fit, the net that caught his letters. The fee that paid a clerk to keep him lost, the 47 votes, and then last, because it was the thing this man had to hear and the thing that would cost him most, the report on Sirius Black, 1 page, an emergency detention order, 12 dead muggles, a finger that was all that was left of Peter Pettigrew, and 6 years in Azkaban with no trial. None, ever. Remus listened to all of it without moving, standing by his cold hearth, and his face did the things a face does when it is being asked to take apart a thing it built to survive. And when Harry reached the end, when he laid the certified copy of the will on the bare table, the bank seal bright on it, James Potter's confident hand and Lily Potter's fierce one there for the man to read in their own words, Remus Lupin sat down on the floor because there was nowhere else to sit and put his face in his hands, and for a while no one in the cottage said anything at all. Harry let him be. He had learned in the vault that there were debts gold could not pay, and that the only currency that would do was to stand still and let a person come apart without an audience pretending not to watch. He looked out the window at the seed-gone garden and gave the man the room. When Remus spoke at last, his voice came from somewhere far down. "I believed it," he said. 6 years I believed it, that serious, that he'd done it. That he'd been their secret keeper and sold them to Voldemort and then killed Peter when Peter cornered him. They told me, and there was a finger, and Sirius was laughing when they took him. They said he was laughing, and I had just lost James and Lily and Peter all in one night, and they handed me a reason and a name to hate, and I was so empty that I took it. I took the hate because it was the only thing left that had any shape. He lowered his hands and looked at the will on the table, at his own name in James's writing. And no one ever showed me this. No one ever told me James named me to raise his son. No one ever told me there was no trial. I'd have Harry, I would have come. If I had known you were named to me even third, even last, I would have come for you. I'd have fought the whole ministry in their cowardly law, and I'd have lost, and I'd have come anyway. They didn't pass me over because I'm a werewolf. His voice cracked clean through. They passed me over because they made sure I never knew there was anything to come for. I've been grieving you for 6 years, not 3 streets from where I could have raised you, and they let me think you were safe and happy and loved with your family, and you were in a cupboard. There it was, the one beat, the whole ache of the chapter landing in a single broken sentence, and Harry did not reach for it or stretch it or make the man say it twice. He let it be said once and true, and then he gave the man the thing that grief alone could never give him, which was a job. "Then help me get him out," Harry said. "Serious. If you believe me, and I think you've started to, then we both think the same thing now, that the man my father named first didn't betray anybody and got buried without a trial the same week the will got buried by the same kind of order for the same reason. I can't prove it yet. I've got bones, the goblins call it, the seal, the statute, the fee, the votes. I need flesh. I need people who knew them, who will swear to what my parents wanted and who Sirius really was. You're the first living mouth in the chorus, Mr. Lupin. My father trusted you to raise me to be kind. The least I'm asking is that you help me prove he was murdered by a lie and his best friend was buried by another one." Remus Lupin looked at the 7-year-old in the better chair, the only chair he'd had to give, and something came back into his ruined face that had been gone from it for 6 years. And it was not happiness, it was too soon for happiness, but it was the thing that comes before happiness and makes it possible, which is purpose. "There was a finger," he said slowly, and now he was not grieving, now he was thinking, and Harry saw the clever man the war had buried under the lonely one start to surface. "That's all they found," they said. Sirius blew him apart along with the street. But Peter, Harry, your father, and Sirius and Peter, they could all do a thing, an illegal thing. They were animagi. They could turn into animals. They did it at school and they never registered it and almost no one knew. Peter's form was a rat. He looked up and the surface of him had gone very still. A man blown to pieces leaves more than a finger. But a man who cut off his own finger and turned into a rat and fled down a drain in the chaos, that man leaves exactly a finger. I never thought of it. In 6 years of hating Sirius, I never once thought of it because they handed me the hate before I could think, and I've been too poor and too tired and too alone to think since. His jaw set. If Peter Pettigrew is alive, then he was the traitor, and Sirius has spent 6 years in Azkaban for a murder that didn't happen and a betrayal that was Peter S. And your parents died because they trusted the wrong friend, but not the friend they named in their will. Not Sirius, Peter. He stood up off the floor, and he was still thin and still poor, but he stood like a man who had remembered he used to be something. I'll swear to all of it. The animagi, the rat, James's certainty, who Sirius was. Whatever court needs from a werewolf it would rather not hear. But Harry, and here he looked at the boy with the first adult clarity anyone had offered him. A chorus of mouths and a brief of bones still has to be heard by someone with the power to act, and the men who built this are the most powerful in the country. Who's going to make the Wisengamot listen to a goblin's ledger, a werewolf's word, and a 7-year-old? That, Harry said, is the next name on my list, my father's fourth guardian, Amelia Bones, who is honest in a city of liars. He stood up too. But before her there's someone closer and someone owed. My father named the Longbottoms second before you, and in 6 years nobody else told me what happened to them either. Remus's face changed. No, he said quietly. No, I don't suppose anyone would have. Harry, sit back down. Some of this you should hear sitting. Before they slept that first night under the bank's roof, Remus told Harry about the marauders because Harry asked, and because the asking was not sentiment but strategy, a boy assembling the people in his case, needing to understand exactly what each of them had been. There were 4 of us, Remus said, sitting on the edge of the spare cot Ironclaw had grudgingly produced. James, Sirius, Peter, and me. We met on the train to school when we were 11, and we were inseparable by Christmas. James and Sirius were the bright ones, loud, brilliant, fearless, the kind of boys the whole school orbits. Peter was the small one, the hanger-on, grateful to be let into the light, and I was the one with the secret, his mouth twisted. Once a month I became something that could have killed all 3 of them. And instead of running, instead of telling a teacher, instead of doing any of the sensible, cowardly things, they spent 3 years secretly learning to become animagi, turning themselves into animals, so that they could be with me on the worst nights, because a werewolf is only a danger to humans, and a wolf among animals is just a wolf among friends. It is the single most reckless, most illegal, most loyal thing anyone has ever done for me, and they never registered it, and almost no one ever knew. What did they turn into? Harry asked, and he was leaning forward now because the cold, clever part of him had already seen where this might go. James was a stag, Sirius a great black dog, and Peter, Remus stopped, and the thing that had been turning in him since the afternoon turned all the way over. Peter was a rat, small, gray. Easy to overlook, we used to laugh about it, that of the 4 of us Peter got the form nobody would look at twice. He went very still. Harry, there is a map, we made it at school, a map of the whole castle that shows every person in it, by name, wherever they are, no matter what shape they wear. It cannot be fooled by an animagus, it reads the person, not the disguise. If that map still exists, and if Peter Pettigrew is alive and hiding as a rat somewhere in the wizarding world, then that map is the one object on Earth that could find him and prove what he is in a single glance. I do not know who has it now. We lost it our last year. But it exists and someone has it, and if your director Bones ever needs to prove a dead man is a living rat, that is where I would tell her to look. Harry held all of it, the stag, the dog, the rat, the map that read the person and not the shape, whole and permanent in the part of him that lost nothing. And he understood that Remus had just handed him not comfort but ammunition, 4 pieces of it, each one a thing that could be sworn to in a court or hunted down in the world, and that the gentlest mouth in his chorus had turned out when it mattered to have the sharpest memory. That's the case against Peter, Harry said quietly. Right there. Unregistered animagus, rat form, faked his death, and a map that can find him. You didn't just give me a witness, Mr. Lupin. You gave me the whole shape of how he walked away from it, and the whole shape of how to walk him back. Remus looked at the boy for a moment, and something that was almost a smile, the first real one, found his thin face. James used to say you'd be trouble, he said. He said it like a hope. He was right, as it happens. You are going to be a great deal of trouble, Harry Potter, to exactly the people who have earned it. I find I have waited 6 years to be on the right side of that, and I do not intend to waste it. He stood. Sleep. We meet the Longbottoms tomorrow, and Augusta Longbottom does not suffer the underrested any more than she suffers fools, and you will want all your wits about you. There are not many people in Britain who can make a goblin nervous. She is one. You will like her enormously, and you will never, ever tell her so. They went to the Longbottoms the next morning, Harry and Remus together, with Griffook trailing as the bank's eyes, and it was the shortest of all the visits and the one that taught Harry the most, because it taught him the asymmetry. Frank and Alice Longbottom were not dead. They were in the long-term ward of St. Mungo S, and they had been there since shortly after the war ended, and they would be there until they died, because a handful of Voldemort's followers, caught after their master fell, refusing to believe he was gone, had tortured the two of them past the edge of their own minds in search of a master who was never coming back. They did not know their son. They did not know anyone. Alice Longbottom, who had said yes to raising Harry, who had a boy of her own born 3 days before him, sat in a white room and handed her visitors gum wrappers she had smoothed flat, one after another, as gifts, and did not know why. It was her mother-in-law who received them, Augusta Longbottom, straight as a wandstaff and twice as hard, in a hat with a stuffed vulture on it and an expression that dared the world to pity her and lose a hand for it. And beside her, half hidden behind her skirts, round-faced and watchful and silent, was a boy exactly Harry's age, who looked at Harry the way Harry had spent his whole life looking at other children, as though they were a country he had heard of and would never be allowed to visit. So, Augusta Longbottom said, when Harry had told her who he was and a little of why he'd come. The Potter boy, walking about with a lupin and a goblin, 7 years old, talking about sealed wills and buried trials. She looked him up and down, and Harry let her, because he had decided that this was a woman who could not be charmed and would have to be respected instead. My son and his wife were named to raise you. Did you know that? Second after the black boy. I knew it. Alice told me the day they wrote it. And do you know, Mr. Potter, that in 6 years not one soul from the ministry, not one soul from the Wisengamot, not Albus Dumbledore himself, ever once came to this old woman and said, the Potters are dead and the Blacks are disgraced and the Longbottoms are named next. Madam, will you take the child? Her chin came up. They never asked. They never asked me, and they never asked the Lupin boy here, and they sent you off to Merlin knows where without troubling a single name on that will, and I always thought it strange, and I am too old and too tired and too busy keeping what's left of my family alive to have ever chased the strangeness down. But you've chased it down, haven't you? 7 years old. Something moved behind the fierceness, and it was respect, given grudging and entire. Your grandmother Potter would have liked you. She was a terror too. Madam Longbottom, Harry said, I'm not here to ask you to take me. You've got a war's worth of grief in this family already and a grandson to raise, and I won't add to it. I'm here because you just told me the most useful thing anyone told me all week. They never asked you. They never asked any of the names. Which means whoever sealed the will didn't just hide a document. They made sure not one of the 4 people in it ever got the chance to step forward, because any one of you stepping forward would have asked, where's the will then? And the whole thing comes apart. He glanced at Neville, half hidden and watching, and something passed between the 2 boys that neither had words for. 2 children born 3 days apart who had both, in different rooms, been handed the wreckage of the same war. You and I are the proof, madam. You're a named guardian who was never asked, and I'm the boy who ended up nowhere on the list. Put us in the same room in front of an honest judge, and there's no innocent explanation left. Augusta Longbottom looked at him for a long moment, and then she did something Harry suspected she did rarely, which was nod as though a matter were settled. I'll say it, she said, to your honest judge, whoever you find fool enough to be honest in that city. I'll stand up in front of the whole Wisengamot in this very hat and tell them they never asked. Bring me the day and the place. She turned, dismissing them with the efficiency of a woman who had 100 things to keep alive before lunch, and then she stopped and looked back, and for one moment the fierceness dropped entirely. They told us all you were being raised well, you know, whenever it came up. Harry Potter is safe and happy with his mother's family. Best not to disturb him. Dumbledore said it himself more than once, and we believed him because he is Dumbledore and one believes him. Her mouth thinned to a blade. I shall enjoy watching someone make him explain the difference between safe and a cupboard. Good day, Mr. Potter. Neville, say goodbye to your friend. And Neville Longbottom, round-faced and silent, lifted one hand in something that was not quite a wave, and Harry lifted one back, and that was the whole of it, and it was enough. That night in the high, small room at the top of the bank, Harry and Remus and Sharptongue planned how to approach the 4th name, because the 4th name was the most dangerous, and they all 3 knew it. Bones is honest, Remus said. He had moved into the bank's lodging at Ironclaw's grudging invitation, which had as much to do with the keeper's distaste for the cottage's thatch as with hospitality, and he looked better already for 3 days of regular meals. But honest isn't the same as safe. She runs the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The moment we tell her, it stops being our secret and becomes a ministry matter with ministry rules and ministry leaks, and there are people in that building who will run to Dumbledore before the ink's dry. Then we don't give her a secret to keep, Harry said. We give her a record to act on. There's a difference. He had the whole shape of it already, the way he had the whole shape of most things by the time he said the first word of them. A secret puts her in a hard spot. Does she protect the boy or protect her career? And honest people lose that fight as often as they win it. But a certified record sworn by the bank, plus a live witness under oath, plus a missing trial that her own law says is illegal, that doesn't ask her to choose between us and her career. It makes acting on it the safe thing and ignoring it the dangerous thing. We don't ask her to be brave. doing her job the path of least resistance, and then we trust that an honest person, handed an easy excuse to finally do the right thing she's been putting off for 6 years, takes it. He looked at Sharptongue. You said she sat through 47 votes beside a Potter seat she never questioned. That means she's already carrying it. People who have ignored something for years don't need persuading. They need permission and a door that opens outward. Sharptongue made the dry sound that passed in him for delight. The black case troubled her at the time, the old goblin said. I have it from the bank's own observers, a junior auror that autumn who asked aloud when the trial would be and was told there would be none. We do not have her name on the asking, but we have the asking. If your reading of her is right, cupboard child, then she has spent 6 years with a splinter in her conscience, and you are about to be the one who finally offers to pull it. Then we lead with the splinter, Harry said, not the will. The trial that never happened, because that's the one she already knows is wrong. We start where she's already on our side, and by the time we get to the will, she's not deciding whether to believe us, she's deciding what to do about a thing she's believed for 6 years and buried. He stood. Tomorrow, we don't charm her, we don't impress her, we don't perform. We give her the truth in order, and we let her conscience do the rest. My father said she was honest in a city of liars. We treat her like the one person in that building who doesn't need to be handled. That's the whole strategy. Honesty aimed precisely. Remus looked at the boy for a moment, and something crossed his thin face that was halfway between grief and wonder. You're 7, he said quietly. I keep being told, Harry said. Amelia Bones did not work in a cottage or a hospital. She worked at the heart of the ministry, in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and getting to her was not a matter of knocking on a door but of the bank requesting, through the cold formal channels that exist between Gringotts and the ministry precisely, so that neither has to be friendly to the other, a private audience on a matter of the law. She received them in a spare gray office with a window that did not really look out on anything, and she was a square, blunt, monocled woman with an iron-colored bob and a way of listening that gave nothing back until she had decided what a thing was worth. And Harry, who had spent his life reading the faces of people who held power over him, looked at her for 30 seconds and revised his whole approach, because this was not a woman to be charmed or impressed or out-argued. This was a woman who could only be given the truth cleanly and trusted to be exactly as honest as his father had written she was, so that was what he gave her. He laid it out in order, the will, the seal, the statute, the net, the fee, the votes, the 4 guardians never asked, Sirius Black in his missing trial, and he laid the certified copy of the will on her desk, and the bank's brief beside it, and Remus Lupin swore then and there to the animagi and the rat and the finger, and Augusta Longbottoms promised to testify, and through all of it Amelia Bones said nothing, and her square face gave nothing back. And at the end she sat very still and looked at the will for a long time. I voted in this body for 6 years, she said at last, to no one, beside a Potter seat I was told was being held in proper trust. I sat through 47 of those votes, give or take, and I never once asked who was casting them or by what authority, because Albus Dumbledore vouched the proxy, and one does not interrogate Albus Dumbledore. She took off the monocle and rubbed the bridge of her nose, and for a moment she looked tired in a way the office's gray light made worse. And the black case. I was a junior auror that autumn. I remember the day they brought him in. I remember asking my supervisor when the trial would be, because there is always a trial, the law requires a trial, and I remember being told that Crouch had signed an emergency order and there wouldn't be one, and I remember thinking that was wrong. I remember it, Mr. Potter. I have remembered it for 6 years, and I remember deciding it was not my place and a war was on and everyone wanted it finished, and I let it go. She put the monocle back. I let it go. I am the head of a department whose entire purpose is that we do not let such things go, and I let it go because the man it would have inconvenienced was the most trusted man in Britain, and the man it would have helped was the most hated, and I was young and it was easier. Her jaw set and the tiredness went out of her, and what replaced it was the thing Harry had come for. I am not young now, and I find I am done letting it go. You have brought me a brief that is bones, child, and a chorus that is mouths, and one thing more that neither bones nor mouths can be. You have brought me a boy in a cupboard, alive in my office, standing up straight and asking me to do my job. She stood, and she was not tall, but the office rearranged itself around her the way Gringotts had rearranged itself around Ironclaw. I am the Director of Magical Law Enforcement. I have the authority to open an investigation, to compel records, to demand a trial that was never held, and to do all of it on my own warrant without asking leave of the Chief Warlock or anyone else. As of this moment, that investigation is open. I will need the bank's full ledgers, sworn and certified. I will need the werewolf's testimony under oath, and yes, Mr. Lupin, I know what the prejudice in this building will make of it, and I will spend my own credibility to make them hear you anyway. And I will need you, Harry Potter, to be exactly as brave in a courtroom as you have been on your way to one. She fixed him with the monocle. Can you do that? Because I will not start a war with Albus Dumbledore and lose, and if I start it, I do not stop until it is finished. Tell me you understand what you are asking me to begin. I understand, Harry said. I've understood since the vault. I'm not asking you to do me a favor, Director Bones. I'm asking you to make them read the will out loud in front of everyone in a place where Dumbledore can't seal it and Umbridge can't redirect it and nobody can tell an old woman in a vulture hat that safe in a cupboard are the same word. That's all I've ever wanted. I want the truth made too loud to bury. You've got the authority to make it loud. I've got the truth. Put them together. Amelia Bones looked at the 7-year-old in her gray office for a long moment, and then she extended her square hand across the desk, and Harry shook it, and the handshake of the Director of Magical Law Enforcement was, Harry would reflect later, the second-best contract he signed that year after a goblin's oath. Then we begin, she said, and God help the both of them. They did not know, the three of them, the boy, the werewolf, and the Director, that 2 floors above and a corridor away, on that very morning, a soft-voiced woman with a love of pink had at last learned the name attached to the Potter proxy, and had read it, and had smiled her wide, soft smile, because Dolores Umbridge had spent 6 years building her safety on the principle that the best place to hide a small crime is in the shadow of a large one. And she had just discovered that the shadow she stood in belonged to the largest man in Britain, and she had also learned, from a careful inquiry of her own into why a sealed estate had stirred, a second fact which she turned over in her soft hands with great interest, that the goblins had requested a private audience with Amelia Bones, about a matter of the law, on the very week the Potter estate woke up. A clerk who has been embezzling does not believe in coincidences. Dolores Umbridge reached for her quill and began to write, not to the goblins this time, and not to Bones, but a soft, sweet, perfectly deniable note requesting a quiet word, at his earliest convenience, with the chief warlock himself. It was time, she decided, that the great man and the small woman compared what each of them had to lose. The machine had felt itself watched, and it had decided at last to close ranks. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The conspiracy resists. The chief warlock received Dolores Umbridge in his office on a Thursday, and he knew within a minute that she had come to threaten him, and he let her think he did not. Albus Dumbledore had not wanted the meeting. He had a great many quiet letters in flight, careful people looking in careful places for a boy who had walked off the edge of the only protection in Britain, and he had no attention to spare for a junior undersecretary with a fondness for kittens and a soft, sweet, deniable note requesting a word. But the note had named the House of Potter, and so he had cleared an hour, and now she sat across his desk with her hands folded over her wand like a woman at prayer, and she smiled at him, and she began to talk in her high girlish voice about the weather, and the war years, and the great burdens carried by great men, and Dumbledore waited, because he had interrogated clever people than this, and the first rule was to let them arrive at their point in their own time, so that they showed you the whole road they had walked to reach it. Such a tragedy, the Potters, Umbridge said at last, arriving, and such a comfort that their affairs were placed in such careful hands. Your hands, Chief Warlock. I had the honor of countersigning the order myself, you may recall. The 5th of November, 1981. A junior clerk then, I have come up in the world since. Her smile did not move. I keep such tidy records. It is my one gift. I can lay my hand on any paper I have ever touched in a moment, even now, every entry, every order, every little quarterly arrangement. I should hate for any of it to ever be misunderstood by someone who did not appreciate how careful we both were, you and I, in a difficult time. And there it was. Dumbledore folded his hands and looked at the soft pink woman across his desk and understood her entirely. That she had been stealing from the frozen estate for 6 years, that she knew his name was on the seal and her hand was on the votes, that the estate had stirred and frightened her, and that she had come here to tell him, beneath all the kittens and the curtsying, a single hard thing. If I go down, you go down, because the same 5th of November holds us both, and I have kept the receipts. He was not afraid of her. He had faced Gellert Grindelwald across a wand, and he was not going to be frightened by a clerk with a ledger. But he was, for the first time in 6 years, uneasy, because her arrival meant the matter had grown a second mover, a hungry and self-interested one, and self-interest was harder to manage than malice and far harder than love. And because she had told him, without meaning to, the thing he had most needed to know and most dreaded, that the estate had stirred. The boy had not merely wandered off. Someone had opened the Potter accounts. My dear Dolores, Albus Dumbledore said gently, and his eyes did not twinkle, I think we understand one another. The protection of a child is a delicate thing, and delicate things are best handled quietly by those who understand their delicacy. You have kept your records. I am sure they are very tidy. Let us both hope that the world never has cause to read them, for I find that when old papers are read aloud, it is so rarely only one name upon them that suffers. He rose, ending the meeting, courteous and absolute. Go back to your office. Keep your records exactly as they are. Touch nothing, move nothing, and above all, draw no further eyes. I will look into the matter of the estate myself. We have, as you say, both been careful. Let us be careful a little longer. She curtsied and smiled and left, and Albus Dumbledore stood at his window for a long while afterward, and the unease did not pass, because a clever man knows the difference between a problem he is managing and a problem that has begun to manage him, and he had just felt the balance tip. The estate had stirred, the boy had vanished. And both had happened in the same week, which meant they were the same event, which meant the impossible thing was true. Somewhere, somehow, a 7-year-old had reached the one document Albus Dumbledore had spent 6 years making certain he could never reach. He did not yet permit himself to wonder whether the child had read it. He went instead to the one place in Britain where a vanished boy and a stirred Potter vault could both be answered at once, because there was only one such place, and he had been avoiding the thought of it the way one avoids a sore tooth. He went to Gringotts. He came at noon, alone, in robes of midnight blue, and the goblins of the great marble hall watched him cross their floor with the flat attention they gave to weather, and not one of them rose or bowed or hurried, because Gringotts bowed to no wizard, and the older among them had reasons today to bow to this one least of all. He was met not by a clerk but by Ironclaw, and beside Ironclaw stood a goblin Harry had not seen before, smaller and older and dressed in iron grey trimmed with old gold, with a chain of office at his throat. Ragnarok, director of the bank, who did not leave the deep offices for wizards and had left them for this. And that, more than anything, told Albus Dumbledore that he had walked into something larger than a missing child. Director Ragnarok, Dumbledore said, inclining his head with perfect courtesy, "You honor me. I had expected a clerk." "You will not be honored long," said Ragnarok, and his voice was the sound of a vault door. "You are received in this hall, Chief Warlock, as a courtesy that hangs by a thread, and the thread is the treaty. And the treaty is the very thing you violated on the 5th of November 1981 when you reached your hand into a sealed vault of this bank and laid your authority where your authority does not run. We have not forgotten it. We did not know of it until lately. We know of it now." The director's black eyes did not blink. "You came here looking for a boy. The boy is a client of this bank in good standing, present on the lawful business of his own estate and under our protection. You will not take him, you will not compel him, you will not so much as raise your voice to him beneath this roof. You may ask to see him, and he, being a free client and not your ward, may answer as he pleases. That is the whole of what your great name buys you here today. Do you understand the size of what it does not buy?" Albus Dumbledore stood very still in the marble hall, and he understood at last and entirely that the architecture of 6 years had not merely cracked but fallen, and that the most dangerous thing in the building was not the director's anger but the fact that a child had walked into the one fortress in Britain where Albus Dumbledore's authority counted for nothing and had stayed. "I should like to see him," the old man said quietly. "Very much, may I?" And from a doorway across the hall, before Ironclaw could answer, a clear young voice said, "Yes, let him. I've been wanting to meet the man my mother warned me about." They gave them a room, a bare stone chamber with a single table and 2 chairs, and Ironclaw standing silent against the wall as the bank's witness, because a free client might speak to whom he pleased, but a goblin would hear every word a wizard said to a child on goblin ground. Harry sat in one chair. Albus Dumbledore lowered himself into the other, and for a moment the two of them simply looked at each other across the table. The old man with the long white beard and the half-moon spectacles and the eyes that had charmed and commanded and outweighted the whole of the wizarding world for a century, and the 7-year-old in clothes that finally fit, sitting very straight, looking back without fear and without anger and without any of the things the old man had braced for. "Hello, Harry," Dumbledore said gently. "I have wanted to meet you properly for a very long time. You have your mother's eyes. I know everyone gets there eventually." Harry folded his hands on the table. "You can skip the part where you tell me how glad you are to see me and how worried you've been. I know you've been worried. You built an instrument to watch the wards on my aunt's house, and it's been ringing for 9 days, and you came here because it led you here. That's not affection. That's a tracking charm with a kind voice. Let's not pretend it's the other thing. I'd rather talk to you honestly. I think you're a man who spent a long time not being talked to honestly, and I think it's why you've gotten so used to deciding things for people. So let's try it the other way." The gentleness on the old man's face did not falter, but something behind his eyes recalibrated, sharply and silently, the way a duelist does when he discovers his opponent is not the novice he was promised. "Very well," Albus Dumbledore said. "Honestly, then, do you know why I placed you with your Aunt, Harry? I know the story you tell. May I say it for you? I'd like to get it right so you can correct me if I'm being unfair." Harry did not wait for permission. He had learned that asking for permission and then proceeding was its own kind of move. When Voldemort, the old man's eyebrows rose at the name from a child's mouth, tried to kill me, my mother died to protect me, and that did something. Old magic. A protection in my blood anchored to her sacrifice that lives as long as I live under the roof of her bloodkin. My aunt is my mother's sister, so as long as I call her house my home, I'm protected by my mother's death. No follower of Voldemort can touch me there, because to touch me they'd have to break a love older than their dark. That's the wards on Privet Drive. That's why you put me there, not because I had nowhere else to go. Because my aunt's blood was the lock on the safest door in Britain, and you needed me behind it, because Voldemort isn't really gone, is he? And someday he's coming back, and when he does I have to still be alive." Harry tilted his head. "Did I get it right?" The silence in the stone room was total. You got it right, Albus Dumbledore said at last, very quietly, and for the first time the old man looked not gentle but tired, tired all the way down. Almost word for word. I confess I did not expect, Harry. No one knows the whole of that. Not the Order, not Minerva, not anyone. How could you possibly? Because it's the only explanation that makes a great and good man do a terrible thing and still believe he's good, Harry said. My mother told me you would. She wrote me a letter. It's in a vault under your feet, sealed under your own seal, which is a sort of poetry when you think about it. She said you mean every word. She said the most dangerous thing about you is that you don't lie, you decide, and then you believe, and then the believing makes the deciding feel like wisdom instead of theft. So I knew there'd be a real reason, a good reason. Men like you don't bury children for bad reasons. That's what makes you so hard to stop. So I worked out the good reason because the good reason is the strongest thing you have, and I wanted to take it apart in front of you fairly so you know I'm not just an angry boy who got hurt. I understand exactly why you did it, and I'm telling you it doesn't matter. Harry, it doesn't matter, Harry said again, and his voice did not rise, and that was what made it terrible, because every single thing you just said could be true, and it still wouldn't give you the right. You're going to tell me the protection saved my life. Maybe it did, I'll even believe you. But here's the thing you didn't count on, the thing my mother saw and you didn't. A person can be protected and robbed at the same time. You could have given me my mother's blood magic and my father's will. You could have put me with my aunt and told my aunt who I was and let the goblins reach me and let Remus visit and let the Longbottoms know I existed and given Sirius a trial. Every protective thing you wanted, you could have had without a single one of the cruel things you chose. The wards didn't require a cupboard. The wards didn't require 6 burned letters. The wards didn't require my godfather rotting on a rock with no trial so he couldn't object. The wards didn't require an old woman in a vulture hat never being asked. You didn't choose the cupboard to protect me. Harry leaned forward, and the greenlit certainty in him was a thing the old man had seen before only in mirrors. You chose it to shape me, because a boy who grows up loved grows up his own. And a boy who grows up unwanted grows up grateful, grateful to whoever finally shows up and tells him he matters. You weren't building a shield. You were building a weapon that would love you for the saving. And my mother begged you not to in her own hand 11 days before she died, and you read it, and you pressed your seal over the begging, and you did it anyway. Albus Dumbledore did not answer at once, and in the not answering, Harry had the whole of his proof, because a man falsely accused protests, and a man rightly accused goes still. I did what I believed was necessary, the old man said finally, and his voice was low. There is a war coming, Harry, a war you cannot imagine, against a thing that did not die that night and will not die easily, and the prophecy that hangs over you means I have to be alive and able and willing when it comes. I know, my mother told me that too, and here's my answer, and it's the same as hers. I'll fight your war. I probably will when it comes, because I don't want people to die any more than you do, and if it really is me or him someday, then it'll be me who stands up. But I'll do it as a person, on my own terms, in my own name. Loved by the people my parents chose, not arranged by you. You don't get to spend my childhood as the down payment on a war that hasn't happened yet. Nobody gets to spend a person. Harry sat back. You should have just asked me, Professor, when I was old enough. You should have told me the truth and trusted me to be brave. I might have chosen the cupboard myself if you'd asked. If it really saved my life, I'm not a fool about death. But you didn't ask, because asking means I might say no, and a peace that can say no isn't a peace you control. That's the whole of it, isn't it? You couldn't bear for the most important child in Britain to be a person who could say no. The old man looked at the boy for a long moment, and something moved across his ancient face that might, in a smaller man, have been shame. What do you want, Harry? He asked quietly. You have clearly not come this far to merely scold an old man. You want something. Tell me what it is, and perhaps we need not be enemies in this. I want the truth made too loud to bury, Harry said simply. All of it, the will, read out loud in front of the whole Wisengamot, the seal, shown to be unlawful, Sirius given the trial he should have had 6 years ago, the Longbottoms remembered, Remus heard. And I want it done in the open, in the light, with you standing there while it happens, because the worst thing I can do to a man who works in the dark is turn the lights on and make him explain himself in front of everyone he's spent a century impressing. He stood up from the too big chair. You came here to take me home, Professor. I don't have one of those yet, but I'm going to. And you're going to help me get it, because the only thing worse for Albus Dumbledore than the truth coming out is the truth coming out and everyone learning he fought to keep it buried. So you can fight me and lose loudly, or you can stand aside and lose quietly. Those are the choices. I'd think about it. He looked at the old man with his mother's eyes. I really would. You're not used to having only bad options. Welcome to my whole life. And the boy who lived walked out of the stone room, past Ironclaw at the wall, and left the greatest wizard of the age sitting alone at a bare table with the door open, having been, for the first time in 100 years, comprehensively and fairly beaten by someone who had not raised a wand or a voice. Albus Dumbledore did not leave Gringotts at once. He sat for a while in the bare stone room with the open door, and when he finally rose and went back across the marble hall, The goblins watched him go with the same flat weather tension, and he felt the weight of their knowing on his back like a hand. He went that evening to the one person he had never quite been able to lie to, because she had known him too long and watched him too closely and loved him without ever once being fooled by him. Minerva McGonagall, his deputy, who had sat with him on a wall in Surrey 6 years ago and argued all night that the boy should not be left there. He found her in her office at Hogwarts marking essays, and he told her not all of it, never all of it, but more than he had told anyone in 6 years. He told her the boy had left Privet Drive. He told her the estate had stirred. He did not tell her about the will, or the seal, or the cupboard, because those were the things that could not be told without ending him. But Minerva McGonagall had spent 40 years catching children in half-truths, and she heard the shape of the whole the moment he started shading the edges. "Albus," she said, setting down her quill, "6 years ago I sat on that wall and I told you those were the worst sort of muggles, and you told me Harry would be safe there and loved and far from his fame until he was ready for it. I believed you. I have spent 6 years believing you and telling others to believe you because it was you who said it." Her voice had gone very quiet and very dangerous. "And now you come to me white as a sheet because a 7-year-old has left and walked into Gringotts of all places, and you will not tell me what he found there. So I am going to ask you one question, and I have known you long enough to read your face when you answer it, so do not trouble yourself to manage me. Was he loved, Albus, in that house, these 6 years? Was the boy loved?" And Albus Dumbledore, who could lie to the Wisengamot and to the minister and to the whole watching world, looked at Minerva McGonagall and found that he could not, after all, make his mouth shape the word, and his silence was the loudest thing in the room. Minerva McGonagall went very still. Then she stood and gathered her tartan dressing gown around her like armor, and her Scottish voice when it came was cold enough to frost the windows. "I see," she said, "I see. Then you and I are going to have a reckoning of our own, Albus Dumbledore, you and I, before whatever is coming arrives, because I trusted you with that child, and I told myself the wall in Surrey was the last time I would ever doubt you, and I was a fool. Get out of my office. I have a great deal to think about, and I find I cannot do it with you in the room looking at me like that." And as he went, she added, in a voice he had not heard from her in 40 years, "I hope to God the boy is cleverer than we were, Albus, because someone in this story has to be, and it was plainly never going to be us." She did not yet know what she would do. But a conscience that has been lied to is a more dangerous thing than an enemy, and Dumbledore walked back through the gates of Hogwarts knowing that he had, in the space of a single day, lost the boy, lost the bank, and begun to lose Minerva, and that all three losses had the same author, a child with green eyes who had simply, patiently refused to stay in the dark. Dolor's Umbridge did not have the luxury of Albus Dumbledore's restraint, because Dolor's Umbridge did not have his protection. He had a name. She had only paper, and paper, she had learned that week, could be read aloud. So while the chief warlock weighed his bad options, the clerk moved, and she moved in the 3 ways a frightened bureaucrat always moves. She tried to seize, she tried to silence, and she tried to put the boy back in the box he had climbed out of. She seized first. She issued, on the authority of her office, a formal demand that Gringotts surrender all records pertaining to the Potter estate to Wisengamot Administration Services for review of the lawfulness of recent access, a demand that would, if obeyed, have put the very ledgers that condemned her into the only hands that could make them disappear. The goblins read her demand, and Director Ragnarok personally inked the reply, which consisted of a single line in the old formal hand: "The bank declines." There was no greeting and no signature, because none was needed. A goblin's no was a complete document. She tried to silence next. She went to her superior in the ministry hierarchy and reported, in tones of grave concern, that the director of magical law enforcement had opened an unauthorized investigation at the behest of goblins and a werewolf, that it threatened to destabilize public faith in the heroes of the war, and that it ought to be reviewed, paused, perhaps reassigned to a more prudent department. It was a clever move, and it would have worked on a smaller woman than Amelia Bones. But Amelia Bones, when the order to pause pending review landed on her desk, read it once and wrote across it in red ink, "DMLE investigations are not paused by administrative services. See the statute I have. A. Bones," and sent it back and opened a second file, this one labeled with Dolor's Umbridge's own name. And so, having failed to seize and failed to silence, Dolor's Umbridge reached for the third lever, the cruelest and the simplest, the one that did not require beating Bones or the bank, but only required reaching a frightened muggle. She went to put the boy back in the box. Vernon Dursley had spent 9 days in a state of low animal relief, because the boy was gone and nobody had come asking, and a problem that leaves on its own is the only kind Vernon liked. So when a squat woman in a pink cardigan appeared on his doorstep with a clipboard and a smile and an envelope thick with official seals, his relief curdled instantly into dread, because in his experience official women with clipboards only ever came to take things or give him things he did not want. She was very pleasant, That was the worst of it. She explained in her high, sweet voice that there had been a regrettable irregularity, that the boy, your nephew, Mr. Dursley, your own dear sister-in-law's son, had been removed from his lawful guardians by undesirable elements, and that the ministry wished only to see him restored to the safe and loving home from which he had been taken. She had papers. She had a custody order signed and sealed, declaring the Dursleys the boy's only lawful guardians and demanding his immediate return. And she had, when Vernon's face suggested that he would rather eat the clipboard than have the boy back, a quiet word about the considerable sum that the Crown, she did not call it the ministry to him, was prepared to settle on a family that did its duty by a difficult orphan. A stipend, backdated, generous. Vernon Dursley, who had told the boy every day for 7 years that he was an unwanted burden, discovered that the boy was worth a great deal of money to the right people, and his outrage and his greed wrestled briefly, and his greed won, as Umbridge had known it would, because she had spent a career learning exactly what a frightened, grasping man would do for a sum of money and a paper that made it legal. "He's been nothing but trouble," Vernon said, signing where she pointed, "but he's family, I suppose. We'll have him back for the boy's own good." "For the boy's own good," Dolor's Umbridge agreed, smiling her wide, soft smile, and took her signed order and left to file it, secure in the knowledge that a custody order from a Muggle guardian stamped by the ministry was a document even Amelia Bones would have to answer, and that a boy returned to Privet Drive was a boy back behind the blood wards, back in the cupboard, back in the box, where stirred estates went quiet again and tidy clerks stayed comfortable and rich. She did not know, because she had never in her life understood the thing she was dealing with, that you cannot put a person back in a box once the person has learned the box was always a lie. She thought she was filing an order. She was, in fact, handing the prosecution its final exhibit. The conspiracy had one more move in it before the session, and it aimed the move at the softest target it could find, which was Remus Lupin. 2 days before the Wisengamot was to convene, a letter arrived for Remus at the bank, on ministry parchment, from the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. It reminded him, in cold and courteous language, that as a registered werewolf his testimony before the Wisengamot was a privilege and not a right, that the giving of false or sensational testimony by a creature of his classification carried penalties up to and including indefinite confinement, and that the department would be observing his conduct at the session with particular interest. It was not signed by Umbridge. It did not need to be. It had her soft fingerprints all over it, a frightened clerk reaching, through a friendly office, to silence the one witness whose word the prejudice of the chamber would already be straining to dismiss. Remus read it twice and went gray, because 6 years of poverty and exile had taught him exactly how little a werewolf's word and a werewolf's freedom were worth in a ministry building, and for one cold hour he believed they had beaten him, that he would have to choose between Harry's case and his own liberty, and that an honest man with everything to lose is the easiest witness in the world to break. It was Harry who put it back together, and he did it not with comfort but with strategy, because comfort would not have helped and strategy did. "They just made a mistake," Harry said, taking the letter, reading it once, keeping it. "A bad one. Look at what this is. 2 days before you testify, someone threatens you in writing on ministry parchment to keep you quiet. That's not a defense, Remus. That's witness intimidation, and it's a crime, and now we have it on paper in their own ink. He looked up, so we don't hide this letter, and we don't let it scare you into silence. We give it to Director Bones today, and she enters it into the record before you ever take the stand, and then your testimony stops being a werewolf's wild story and becomes the testimony they tried so hard to suppress that they committed a crime to do it. Nobody works that hard to silence a lie, Remus. They only work this hard to silence the truth. You don't bury this, you hold it up. The thing they meant to frighten you with is the thing that proves you're worth frightening." He handed the letter back. "My father named you in the teeth of a cowardly law. Stand up in the teeth of a cowardly office. They've just handed you the one thing that makes them stop being able to dismiss you. Use it." Remus Lupin looked at the boy, and the gray went out of his face, and what replaced it was the clever, stubborn man the war had buried, surfacing for good this time. "James would have said exactly that," he said quietly, only with more shouting and worse grammar. He folded the letter and put it away to give to Bones. "All right, I'll hold it up. Let them observe my conduct with particular interest. They're going to get an eyeful." Amelia Bones did not waste the days she had. An honest investigator with a warrant and a grievance is the most efficient force in any bureaucracy, and she had been waiting 6 years without knowing it for an excuse to be exactly this efficient. She compelled the black file first, the real one, not the one-page emergency order, but the whole of it, every scrap the department held, and what she found was nothing, and the nothing was damning. No trial transcript, no record of a Wisengamot vote. No testimony taken from Sirius Black, not one word ever in 6 years. An emergency detention order signed by Crouch and then simply never followed by anything, because the war had ended and the man was hated, and no one had wanted to be the one to ask the inconvenient question. She summoned the old duty logs of the Aurors who had made the arrest and read them past midnight, and she found the detail the histories had smoothed away. That the only remains recovered of Peter Pettigrew were a single finger, that the blast had killed 12 muggles, and that no one, not one investigator in 6 years, had ever asked how a man blown to nothing leaves a finger and nothing else. A finger, she said aloud to her empty office at 1 in the morning, and she thought of a thing Remus Lupin had sworn to her under oath about a rat, and she went cold all over because she was a careful enough investigator to know what it meant when the physical evidence fit the unspoken theory better than it fit the official one. She compelled Umbridge's records next over the furious objection of administrative services, and here she did not need theory at all, because here there was arithmetic. The quarterly stewardship fees drawn against the frozen Potter estate, 6 years of them, modest and regular, and adding to a sum that no clerk's honest salary could explain. The standing redirection order, renewed in Umbridge's own hand in 3 separate years. The custody order, fresh, with a backdated Muggle stipend attached. Amelia Bones laid them out on her desk in a row and looked at them, and she did not feel triumph. She felt the particular grim disgust of a lawkeeper who has found, at last, the rot she suspected and half hoped she was wrong about. And then she did the thing that made her, in Harry's later estimation, worth every word his father had written about her. She did not take her evidence to Dumbledore or to the minister or to any of the great careful people who might have advised caution. She took it on the second night to a small house at the end of a rutted lane that the bank had told her of, and she sat at Remus Lupin's bare table, the director of magical law enforcement and a penniless werewolf, and she said, "Tell me everything you know about Peter Pettigrew, Mr. Lupin, from the beginning, and leave nothing out because you think a court won't believe a werewolf. I will decide what a court believes. That is, it turns out, my entire job, and I have been neglecting it, and I am done neglecting it." And Remus told her, and somewhere in the telling the case stopped being Harry's brief and became the Crown's, which was the moment it became unstoppable. They told Harry that evening in the high room, Ironclaw and Remus and Sharptongue all three, because it was the kind of news that wanted more than one mouth to soften it, and Harry listened to all of it. The seizure refused, the silencing failed, and then the custody order, Vernon's signature, the stipend, the ministry stamp, and at the end of it he was quiet for a moment, and then to their surprise he almost smiled. "She signed the Dursleys back into it," he said. "Don't you see what she just did? She was so busy trying to put me back in the box that she made Vernon Dursley sign a piece of paper, in front of a ministry witness, accepting custody of me for money, for a backdated stipend. She just created a document that proves the Dursleys never wanted me, that they had to be paid to take me, and that the ministry was willing to pay them. That's not an order that puts me back, that's a confession that I was sold." He looked at Remus. "How much does a man who loves his nephew need to be paid to take him in? Nothing. You take family for nothing. You take family because they're family. The stipend is the proof that everyone always knew, Dumbledore knew, the ministry knew, Umbridge knew, that the Dursleys would only keep me if it paid, and they arranged for it to pay for 6 years out of my own father's estate. She didn't trap me. She wrote down the motive." "That may be true," said Ironclaw, "and it is well reasoned, and it is also true that a ministry custody order is a real instrument with real force, and that there are people in that building who will use it to march you back to Surrey tomorrow if we let them, confession or no confession. Cleverness on paper does not stop a writ at the door. We need the matter heard before the order can be executed. We need it heard fast and loud, and somewhere Umbridge cannot file it into a drawer and Dumbledore cannot seal it into a vault." He looked at the boy. "Director Bones came to the same conclusion an hour ago and has already acted on it. You should hear it from the parchment." He laid a single sheet on the table. It bore the seal of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and it was addressed to the Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, and it was very short. "By the authority of the Director of Magical Law Enforcement, and pursuant to evidence of grave and unlawful conduct touching the estate, the guardianship, and the unlawful detention without trial of persons connected to the House of Potter, a full and public session of the Wizengamot is hereby summoned, the Director invoking her right to compel such a session in a matter of law enforcement. The Chief Warlock is required to convene. The session is not to be closed. The session is not to be sealed. Attendance of all members is compelled. Amelia S. Bones." Harry read it twice, and then he set it down, and the thing that had set in him in the vault, the iron cooling into a shape that would not bend, was complete now and steady and almost calm. "A full session," he said. "Public, can't be closed, can't be sealed, everyone has to come. Dumbledore has to convene the very court where his own crime gets read out, because the law says the Director can make him." Looked up at the three of them, the goblin and the werewolf and the Master of Testaments, the strangest and truest allies a buried boy had ever assembled. "That's it, that's the room I've wanted since the vault. The lights go on and they all have to stand in them, Dumbledore with his protection and his prophecy, Umbridge with her tidy receipts, the Dursleys and their stipend, and me, and the will and Sirius's missing trial, all in the same room at the same time, too loud to bury." He took a breath. "When?" 3 days, said Ironclaw. The law gives the chief warlock 3 days to convene a compelled session, and not an hour more. 3 days, Heir Potter. And then you stand in front of the whole of Wizarding Britain with the truth in your hands, and you make them read it out loud. There is one more thing, Harry said, and it's the thing I care about most, so I want it settled tonight. Sirius. The session's no good to him if he's not in it. A trial without the accused in the room is just another sealed file with better manners. I want him there, in the light, where the whole Wisengamot has to look at what 6 years on that rock does to an innocent man while they decide whether they're the kind of people who did it on purpose. Director Bones has already signed the order, said Ironclaw. It was the first thing she did after compelling the session. A prisoner whose detention is itself under investigation may be produced before the body investigating it. The law is old and it is clear, and not even the chief warlock can quash it. Sirius Black will be brought from Azkaban under Aura Guard the morning of the session and held in the ministry until he is called. He paused. You should be prepared, Heir Potter. The man who comes off that rock will not be the man your father named. 6 years among the Dementors hollows a soul. He may not know you. He may not know himself. He may weep or rave or sit and stare. Do not let what you see in that courtroom make you doubt what you have proven on paper. The paper is true, whatever the man has become, and the cruelty done to him is more of your case, not less. I know, Harry said. I've thought about it. I'm not bringing him to the light because he'll be impressive. I'm bringing him because they'll have to see him. A clean argument they can vote against. A clever boy they can resent. But an innocent man ruined, standing in front of them because of a trial they skipped. There's no clever vote against that. There's only what kind of people they want to be when the whole country is watching them decide. He looked at Remus, who had gone pale at the thought of seeing his old friend after 6 years and 6 lies. And he won't be alone in that room, will he? He'll have you and me, and a will with his name written first, and a director who finally did her job, and a goblin who never forgets a debt. That's more than he's had in 6 years. That's more than enough to start with. Remus could not speak for a moment, and when he could, all he said was, James chose his friends well, both of them. He just couldn't have known which one would prove it. Harry looked out the slit of window at the crooked roofs of Diagon Alley, gone gold in the evening, and somewhere across the city, an old man in a high tower was weighing 2 bad options. And a soft pink woman in a low office was discovering that her custody order had summoned the very session she most feared, and the machine that had run for 6 years on the certainty that the boy would never know was grinding now toward the one place machines built in the dark cannot survive. The open floor of a public court in the light with every member compelled to watch. 3 days, Harry said, then we turn on the lights. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. Into the light, the courtroom under the ministry was built to make a person feel small, and it had succeeded on everyone who had ever stood in its well. And on the morning of the compelled session it failed, for the first time in its history, on a 7-year-old boy. It was a vast circular chamber of dark stone, tiered up and up into shadow, ringed with the high benches of the Wisengamot in their plum robes, and at its center a single chair where the accused traditionally sat. Harry did not sit in the chair. He stood beside it in clothes that fit, with Remus Lupin on one side and the certified copy of his parents' will in his own 2 hands, and he looked up at the hundreds of faces ringed above him. The most powerful people in Wizarding Britain, the press in their gallery with quills already moving, the public crammed into every gap, and he found that he was not small at all. He had spent 7 years being made small by 3 people in a house on Privet Drive. These hundreds were going to find it much harder than the Dursleys had, because the Dursleys had had a locked cupboard and these people had only the truth, and the truth was on his side. In a railed-off box to one side, looking as though they had been dropped into the wrong universe and would very much like to be dropped back out of it, sat 3 muggles. Amelia Bones had compelled their attendance, and Vernon Dursley sweated in his best suit and gripped the rail with both hands, and Petunia sat rigid and gray beside him with her thin mouth pressed white, and Dudley squirmed between them, and not one of the 3 would look at the boy in the well. Harry looked at them exactly once, a level, unhurried look, the look of someone confirming a fact rather than seeking a reaction, and then he turned away, because they were evidence now, not family, and they had never really been the other thing. Albus Dumbledore sat in the chief warlock's high seat above them all, because the law required him to convene and to preside, and the exquisite cruelty of it, that the man who had buried this would have to hold the gavel while it was dug up, was not lost on a single goblin in the visitors' gallery, where Ironclaw and Sharptongue and Director Ragnarok sat in a row of iron gray and watched the wizards with the patience of creditors at a foreclosure. Beside the chief warlock's seat in the deputy's place, Minerva McGonagall sat very straight, and she did not look at Dumbledore once. Amelia Bones rose from the floor of the well, and the chamber stilled, and she did not raise her voice, because she had learned long ago that a quiet voice in a vast room makes everyone lean in. I have compelled this session, she said, under my authority as Director of Magical Law Enforcement in a matter of law. I will be brief because the facts are brief and they are terrible and they will not be improved by decoration. She turned a slow circle, taking in the tears. 6 years ago, two of our greatest heroes were murdered. They left a will. That will was lawfully made, blood-sealed, and lodged with Gringotts. It named guardians for their orphaned son. For it could be read before a single one of those guardians could be asked. It was sealed shut by an order of this body's own chief warlock, under an emergency law that did not apply to it, and it has remained sealed, unread, and unexecuted for 6 years, during which the boy it concerned was placed in the one home the will expressly forbade. His godfather was imprisoned without trial, and his estate was quietly mined for fees by the office that sealed him away. She let the silence stretch. I did not believe it either, so I brought the documents. Let us begin with the will itself, which most of you have been told for 6 years does not exist or cannot be opened or is none of our concern. The bank will produce it. Read it aloud. Sharptongue read it aloud. He came down from the gallery, an old goblin in a chamber that had never once invited his kind to speak, and he climbed onto a stool placed for him in the well because the lectern had been built for taller folk, and he read the will of James and Lily Potter to the assembled Wisengamot in his dry rust-file voice, and he read every word, and the chamber did not breathe. He read the 4 guardians, named in order: Sirius Black first, no second choice while he lives and is free, then the Longbottoms, then Remus Lupin, named in the teeth of a cowardly law, then the House of Bones. He read the clause that held the Potter seat in trust, not to be voted by any proxy save the express consent of the guardian, for we have seen what is done in this war with the votes of the dead and the absent. And then he read in the same dry voice, with no more emphasis on it than on anything else, because the words needed no help, Lily Potter's torn parchment plea. Under no circumstance, in no event, by no order of any court or council or well-meaning man, is our son to be given into the keeping of my sister, Petunia Dursley, or her household. I am writing it in my own hand so that no one can pretend I did not mean it, not Petunia, never Petunia. When he finished, the silence in the great chamber had a texture to it, and the texture was shame, the slow collective shame of several hundred powerful people realizing at once that they had spent 6 years approving of a thing they had never looked at. That is the will, said Amelia Bones into the silence. Made the 24th of October, 1981, 11 days before they died. Now, the seal that buried it. She held up a parchment. On the 5th of November, 1981, this body's chief warlock affixed an emergency seal to that will, citing the Emergency Powers Act of that year. I have read that act. It authorizes the seizure of property and instruments in the service of the enemy. I invite any member of this body, any one of you, to explain how the last wishes of 2 murdered heroes constitute an instrument in the service of the man who murdered them. She turned in a slow circle. No one spoke. No. I thought not. The seal was unlawful on the day it was placed. It has been unlawful every day since. And it was countersigned, she lifted the parchment higher, by a clerk of Wisengamot Administration Services, $1 Jane Umbridge, who is present in this chamber, and to whom we shall return because her hand is on a great deal more than this. In the 3rd tier, a squat woman in pink went very still, and her wide, soft smile did not waver, and that stillness was the first crack. Before any wizard could speak, a voice came down from the visitors' gallery that the chamber had never in its history heard raised in that place, the voice of a goblin, addressing the Wisengamot as an equal. The bank will be heard, said Director Ragnok, and he did not ask, he stated, and he rose in his iron gray and old gold, and let the chamber feel the weight of 3,000 years standing up. We have sat in silence in your gallery for the length of a morning, which is longer than your kind has any right to expect of mine. We will be silent no further. Hear what was done to us, wizards, while you decide what was done to the boy, for the two are one act, and we will not have ours forgotten in the noise of yours. The new chief warlock pro tempore, for Dumbledore had not yet fallen, but no one moved to silence the director, because no one in that chamber was foolish enough to be the wizard who told a goblin to sit down on the record, inclined his head, and Ragnok went on, and his voice was the grinding of a vault door. On the 5th of November, 1981, a wizard reached his hand into a sealed vault of Gringotts and laid his authority upon ground where, by the oldest article of the treaty between our peoples, older than your ministry, older than this very room, signed in blood when both our races were young, no wizard authority runs. What is sealed in a vault answers to the bank and to the blood for which it was made, and to no wand, no warrant, and no Wisengamot. The seal your chief warlock placed was not merely unlawful by your law. It was an act of war by ours, committed in the dark against a vault we were sworn to keep, and we did not know of it for 6 years because it was hidden as cunningly from us as from the child. A bank that cannot keep a vault is not a bank. You made us for 6 years not a bank, and you did it without our knowledge, which is the deeper insult, for you made us complicit in our own dishonor. His black eyes swept the tears, and not one plum-robed wizard met them. We have not come for vengeance. Goblins do not take vengeance. We take payment, and we keep accounts, and this account has run unbalanced for 6 years. So hear the bank's price and enter it in your record. You will affirm this body in writing, sealed, that the sovereignty of a Gringotts vault is absolute, that no emergency of wizard kind shall ever again be held to reach within it, and that the placing of that seal was a violation for which your ministry stands in the bank's debt. You will affirm it today, or the doors of Gringotts will be a great deal harder for wizards to open tomorrow. The boy has shown you what one buried child can do to your comfortable lies in a single morning. Do not learn next what a closed bank can do to your comfortable economy in a single week. There was no challenge to that, there could be none. A wizard rose pale and moved that the bank's affirmation be entered and sealed at once, and it carried without a single voice against, and Director Ragnok inclined his head a precise half-inch, the courtesy of a creditor whose ledger has in one column been balanced, and resumed his seat, and Sharptongue beside him permitted himself, for the first time in 6 years, the dry ghost of a goblin's satisfaction. They challenged it, of course. The powerful do not fall silent forever, they regroup, and a heavy-set wizard named Yaxley rose from the high benches with the smooth assurance of a man who had defended worse, and he said what the room needed someone to say so that it could be answered, that the chief warlock was the most trusted man in Britain, that the war had demanded hard choices, that surely there was an explanation, that one did not simply accuse Albus Dumbledore. "You are right," said Harry Potter. It was the first time he had spoken, and his clear young voice cut through the chamber like a struck bell, and every head turned, and the press quills in the gallery went mad. "You don't simply accuse Albus Dumbledore," Harry said, walking to the center of the well, the will still in his hands, looking up at the man in the high seat as he said it. "He's great, and he's good, and he's done more for the light than anyone alive, I know. My mother wrote it in a letter that's been sealed under his own seal for 6 years. She wrote that he's great and good and that I should trust him with my life, and then she wrote that the most dangerous thing about him is that he means every word, that he's a man who decided he can see further than everyone else, and that the seeing gives him the right to arrange smaller people's lives for a good they're too small to understand." He turned slowly, addressing the tiers now, the hundreds. "So I'm not going to accuse him of being evil, he is. I'm going to accuse him of something the law actually cares about, which is much simpler and much harder to forgive. I'm going to accuse him of deciding all by himself that he had the right to bury a dead woman's last words, imprison an innocent man without a trial, and raise her son in a cupboard for that son's own good. And I'm going to ask you a question that has nothing to do with how great he is." He stopped, facing the high seat. "If the most trusted man in Britain can seal away a will he doesn't like, and skip a trial he finds inconvenient, and place a child wherever he privately thinks best, all under emergency powers, with no one allowed to check him, then what exactly is the difference between him and the Dark Lord he saved us from? Because the Dark Lord also thought he knew best. The Dark Lord also thought the rules were for smaller people. The only difference I can find this morning is that one of them is kind about it, and I don't think kindness is a defense for breaking the law. I think it's just how the good ones get away with it." Yaxley sat down. He did not have an answer because there was not one, and the chamber knew it. It did not escape Harry that Yaxley had risen to challenge the case and not to defend the man. There was a difference, and Harry caught it the moment the heavy-set wizard sat back down, because a true ally of Dumbledore's would have argued the protection, the prophecy, the necessity, and Yaxley had argued only the man's reputation, which was the one part of Dumbledore that could be allowed to fall without anyone in Yaxley's row of high benches losing a thing. They were not here to save the chief warlock. They were here to watch him bleed and to be seen having concern about the procedure while they did it, so that when the great man fell, and they could see now that he would fall, they would be positioned as the sober, prudent voices who had questioned him all along. A whole row of them. Old families, old gold, old sympathies that had gone quiet but never away when the Dark Lord fell 6 years ago. They had hated Dumbledore for a decade, and here was a 7-year-old handing them his ruin gift-wrapped, and they meant to take it, and to use the wreckage of Harry's stolen childhood as a ladder to climb over the body of the only man who had ever truly frightened them. Harry understood it in the space of a held breath, and he understood the danger of it, which was subtler and longer than the danger in the room. That justice for his parents could become, if he let it, merely a weapon in someone else's older war, that the men who had served the thing that killed his mother and father would dearly love to dress themselves in his cause. His mother had warned him of exactly this. Do not let anyone make you a weapon. Not for a bad cause and not for a good one, especially not for a good one, because the good ones are how they get you. This was neither a bad cause nor a good one. It was their cause wearing his. He would deal with them later and carefully, and for years, because men like that were not undone in a morning the way a clerk's ledger was. For now he marked the row of smooth, pale faces and the hunger they were failing to hide, and he made himself a single promise about them, cold and clear, that whatever justice came out of this chamber today would be his justice and his parents' and Sirius's, and that not one inch of it would be allowed to become a rung in the ladder of the men who had cheered once quietly the night his family died. And in the high seat Albus Dumbledore rose. "The child is right," Albus Dumbledore said, and the chamber gasped because they had expected him to fight. He stood in the chief warlock's seat, an old man in midnight blue, and he laid down the gavel, because a man cannot preside over his own reckoning, and he addressed the body he had led for decades with a heaviness that silenced even the quills. "I sealed the will," he said. "I countersigned the redirection of the boy's correspondence. I placed Harry Potter with his mother's sister, against the express written wish of his parents, and I did not give Sirius Black a trial, because a trial would have raised questions about the guardianship I had already decided upon, and I judged alone on my own authority that the protection a mother's sacrifice affords through a blood relative was worth more than the boy's comfort, or his godfather's freedom, or the law itself." He drew a breath. "I believed there was a war still coming. I believe it still. I believed this child would be its hinge. And I believed, God forgive me, that a hinge must be kept safe and kept ready, whatever the cost to the boy who happened to be it. I told myself it was protection. The child has told me more plainly than I have ever allowed anyone to tell me anything that it was control. He is right. I have had 6 years and one terrible morning to find the difference between those words, and I can no longer pretend I do not see it." The chamber was utterly silent. "But," said Albus Dumbledore, and his voice gathered itself, because even now, even falling, the old man was the cleverest mind in the room and knew exactly where the true danger lay. "I will say one thing in my own defense, and it is not for my sake but for the boy's, because he must hear it whether he wishes to or not. The protection was real. The blood wards were not a fiction I invented to justify a cruelty. There are those who served the Dark Lord who walked free after the war, who would have given a very great deal to find this child unprotected in his cradle, and the magic of his mother's death kept him from them for 6 years. I did a wrong thing. I do not pretend the wrong thing did no good. Both are true, and the boy is clever enough to hold both, and the rest of you had better learn to, because the war I sealed that will to prepare for is still coming, and when it arrives you will wish you had spent this morning preparing for it instead of being shocked by an old man's sins." It was, Harry would reflect afterward, a masterful thing, a confession that was also a warning, a fall that tried to take the moral high ground down with it. And it would have worked on a lesser opponent because it was true, and truth is the hardest thing to fight. So Harry did not fight it, he agreed with it and turned it. "He's right again," Harry said to the chamber. "The protection was real. He probably did save my life. I'm not going to stand here and tell you the blood wards were fake, because they weren't, and pretending otherwise would make me exactly the kind of person who decides which true things get said out loud, which is the whole crime we're here about." He looked up at the old man, and there was something almost gentle in it now, which was worse than anger. "But here's what he still won't say, even falling. He keeps telling you it was protection or the law, the wards or the will, my safety or my parents' wishes. As if he had to choose. He never had to choose. He could have kept every single ward and still told my aunt who I was. He could have kept me behind the blood magic and still let Remus visit, still let the Longbottoms know I lived, still given Sirius his trial, still read the will and honored the parts that didn't touch my safety. The protection required a roof. It did not require a cupboard. It did not require 6 burned letters. It did not require an innocent man on a rock for 6 years. Every cruelty was a choice made on top of the protection, not instead of it, and he's standing up there hoping you'll be so grateful the protection was real that you won't notice the cruelty was optional." Harry turned back to the tears. "Don't let him trade you. The war can be real and the cupboard can be a crime. Both are true. He taught me to hold both this morning. Hold both." And Minerva McGonagall in the deputy's seat rose to her feet, and the whole chamber turned, because the deputy rising against the chief warlock was a thing that had not happened in living memory. "I sat on a wall in Surrey 6 years ago," she said, her Scottish voice ringing, "and I told Albus Dumbledore those were the worst sort of muggles, and that the boy should not be left with them, and he told me Harry would be safe and loved, and I believed him because it was Albus, and one believed Albus. I have spent 6 years telling others to believe him. I would like the record of this body to show that the boy was not loved, that I was lied to in order to secure my silence, and that the child standing in that well has more honesty in him at 7 than this entire chamber has shown in 6 years, myself first among the guilty." She sat down, white-faced and rigid. "I am ashamed. Let it be on the record that I said so." The thing the will had begun, McGonagall's words finished. The chamber's shame curdled into resolve, and the tide, which had been turning all morning, turned all the way. It was Amelia Bones who brought in Sirius Black, because she had signed the order and she would not let another hand do it. The doors at the back of the chamber opened and 2 Aurors came through, and between them, in chains he did not seem to feel, came a man. The chamber, which had braced for a monster, went silent in a different register, because what came through the doors was not a monster. It was a ruin. Sirius Black had been a handsome man once. The bones of it were still there under the filth and the gray and the hollow. He was thin past thin. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had spent 6 years hearing the worst thing that ever happened to him on a loop, with nothing else, and they moved over the great chamber without fixing on anything dull and far away, until in the whole room watched it happen. They found a thin man with gray-flecked hair standing in the well, and then a small boy with black hair and green eyes standing beside him. and something flickered in the ruin, the faintest ember under 6 years of ash. James. Sirius Black said in a voice like a door that had not been opened in years, and then, because the boy was too small to be James, because the boy had Lily's eyes, the ember caught and his ruined face came apart. No, no, you're Harry, Harry. They told me you were. He swayed in his chains. Is it you? Is it really Merlin? You've got his hair, you've got Lily's eyes. They told me you were safe, they told me you were happy. That's the thing I held on to, the one thing, that you were safe and happy, and I didn't have to. His voice broke entirely. Tell me you were happy, Harry, please. Tell me at least one of us got to be. And here was the one emotional beat of the whole terrible morning, the single moment the case stopped being a case, and Harry did not perform it and did not stretch it, because it did not need help any more than his mother's torn page had needed help. I wasn't, Harry said clearly into the silent chamber, looking at his godfather. But I'm going to be, and so are you. I came to get you out, Sirius. That's the whole reason I'm here. My dad named you first. Sirius Black, the first guardian, the man the will had said there was no second choice while he lived and was free, looked at his best friend's son across a courtroom that had forgotten him for 6 years, and wept in his chains without shame, while several hundred of the most powerful people in Britain were made to watch what their convenience had cost. Veritaserum, said Amelia Bones into that silence, and her voice was iron. 3 drops, administered now before this body on the record. The accused has never once been questioned in 6 years. We will remedy that this morning. And then, members of the Wisengamot, you will hear the truth from his own mouth, and you will have to decide what kind of people you have been. The truth, under 3 drops of Veritaserum, took 4 minutes, and it broke the last of the conspiracy's spine. Sirius Black, his ruined voice gone flat and certain under the potion, told the chamber that he had not been the Potter's secret keeper. That he had persuaded James and Lily at the last moment to switch the secret to Peter Pettigrew instead of himself, because everyone would hunt me. I was the obvious one. No one would suspect little Peter. It was supposed to be clever. It was supposed to be safe. That Peter Pettigrew had been the traitor, had sold them to Voldemort, had faked his own death in the street, cut off his own finger, blew apart the road, turned into a rat. He was always a rat, an animagus, unregistered. We all were, James and I and Peter, we never told, and fled into the sewers 6 years ago while Sirius was seized for the crime, laughing not in triumph, but in the first crack of a grief that would have 6 years to finish breaking him. Why did you not say this at your trial? Amelia Bones asked, though she already knew. What trial? Said Sirius Black under the serum with the flat, terrible simplicity of a truth that cannot be dressed. There was no trial. They never asked me anything. Nobody ever asked me anything. They just put me on the rock. The chamber made a sound then, a low collective sound, and it was the sound of several hundred people understanding at the same instant that they had let a man rot for 6 years for a crime, without ever once asking him whether he had done it, and that the only reason they were learning the truth now was that a 7-year-old in a cupboard had decided to read his own mail. And in the third tier, the squat woman in pink stood up, because Dolor's Umbridge had a fine animal instinct for exactly the moment a sinking thing was going to take everyone down with it, and she had decided in that instant to leap before she was pushed. I only did the paperwork. Her high, sweet voice had gone shrill. I was a junior clerk. I countersigned what the chief warlock put in front of me. It was his seal, his authority, his decision. One does not question Albus Dumbledore. She was pointing now, a soft pink finger trembling at the high seat. He sealed the will. He ordered the boy placed. Whatever was done, it was done on his authority, and I was a girl of 20 doing as I was told. You renewed the redirection order in your own hand in 3 separate years, said Amelia Bones, without raising her voice. You drew a stewardship fee against the frozen estate quarterly for 6 years into your own accounts, sums I have here, certified by the bank that no clerk's salary explains. You did not merely do the paperwork, Madam Umbridge. You found a sleeping estate and you milked it, and you kept it sleeping because a waking estate would have ended the income. And 4 days ago, when it stirred, you forged a custody order and paid a muggle a backdated bribe to put the child back in the box, to protect not the boy and not the wards and not Albus Dumbledore, but your own 6-year theft. She held up the ledgers. The chief warlock's crime was the abuse of authority for a cause he believed in. Yours was embezzlement for cash. His this body may yet find a way to forgive. Yours it will not, because there is no greater good hiding underneath it. There is only the gold. She nodded to the Aurors. Dolor's Jane Umbridge, you are under arrest. And Dolor's Umbridge, who had spent a career learning that the safest place to hide a small crime was in the shadow of a large one, discovered the flaw in her whole philosophy at the moment the shadow turned and pointed at her, that when the large crime finally falls into the light, the small one hiding in its shadow is the most exposed thing in the room. She did not go quietly. She never would have. But she went, shrieking about kittens and loyalty and how dare they, and the doors closed on her wide, soft smile at last gone, and the chamber let out a breath it had been holding for 6 years. There remained the Dursleys, and Amelia Bones did not let them slip out in the chaos of Umbridge's arrest, because the custody order and its backdated bribe were exhibits in their own right, and the people who had signed them were sitting in a railed box 10 feet away. "Mr. Dursley," she said, and Vernon Dursley flinched as though struck. "4 days ago you signed a ministry custody order accepting the return of your nephew. Attached to it was a stipend, a sum of money, backdated 6 years, offered to you by the woman now in custody in exchange for taking the boy. Did you sign it?" Vernon's jaw worked. He looked at the order she held up, his own signature on it, and there was no lie large enough to fit around it. "He's family," he managed. "We took him in." "Out of the goodness of we didn't have to, you took him in," said Amelia Bones, "for a stipend drawn from his own murdered parents' estate, and when he was returned to you free of charge for 7 years you kept him in a cupboard, and 4 days ago you would only agree to have him back when you were paid. I am not here to charge you, Mr. Dursley. The muggle in this is the least of my concerns, and you were lied to by people far cleverer than you. I am here only to establish on the record in front of this body one fact," she turned to the tears, "that the home Albus Dumbledore chose for this child over the express written wish of his mother, the home he called protection, was a home that would not keep the boy without being paid to. There was never any love in it to weigh against the law. There was a stipend. Let the record show the price of Harry Potter's childhood, and let it show that everyone who arranged it knew there had to be a price, because they all knew, as his mother knew, exactly what kind of people they were sending him to." And then Sharptongue, still on his stool in the well, did a thing no one had asked him to do. He lifted the will again, and he read, a second time into the silence, the single torn line in Lily Potter's hand. "I know my sister. I know what she thinks of what I am and what my son will be. She would not strike him, perhaps. She is a coward, not a brute, but she would let him grow up believing he is small and wrong and unwanted. Not Petunia, never Petunia." And Petunia Dursley, who had sat gray and rigid and silent through the whole of it, made a sound, a single, broken, involuntary sound, and put her thin hand over her mouth. And for one instant, before the rigidity came back down like a portcullis, the whole chamber saw a woman hear her dead sister's voice call her a coward across 6 years in the grave, and saw that the worst of it, the very worst, was that the dead woman had been exactly right, and the living one knew it. She said nothing. There was nothing a coward could say, but she looked once at the boy in the well, her sister's son, with her sister's eyes, and whatever passed over her gray face in that moment, it was not the contempt Harry had lived under for 7 years. It was closer to shame, and it was 6 years too late, and Harry received it with a level, unhurried look, and gave her back neither forgiveness nor cruelty, only the plain fact of a boy who had survived her and would not be needing her again. It was nearly evening when the Wisengamot finished, because there was a great deal to rule on, and the law required each ruling to be voted, and Harry stood in the well through all of it, with Remus on one side and his ruined godfather, unchained now, slumped in the central chair on the other, one filthy, trembling hand gripping the boy's shoulder as if it were the only solid thing in the world. They ruled the emergency seal unlawful from the moment it was placed, void and struck, the will restored to full force. They ruled the detention of Sirius Black unlawful, his imprisonment without trial a violation of the most basic law of the realm, and on the testimony given under Veritasrum they declared him innocent of every charge, and ordered the immediate reopening of the hunt for Peter Pettigrew, who was, the record would now show, alive, an unregistered animagus, and the true betrayer of the House of Potter. They referred Dolor's Umbridge for trial on charges of embezzlement, forgery, and the unlawful detention of correspondence, and a dozen lesser counts that Amelia Bones recited with grim satisfaction. They restored the Potter seat to its trust, the 47 unlawful proxy votes struck from the record, the seat to remain unvoted until Harry came of age and could spend his family's voice himself, exactly as his parents had written. And they came at the last to Albus Dumbledore, and here the chamber slowed, because here there was no easy ruling, because the man's crime and the man's service sat on the same scale, and the scale would not settle. It was Dumbledore himself who settled it. He rose one final time, and he removed from around his own neck the chain of the Chief Warlock's office, and he laid it on the seat. "I will spare this body the labor of deciding what to do with me," he said quietly, "by deciding it myself, which is, I am aware, the very habit that brought us all here, and which I will indulge one final time because it is the only thing left that I can usefully do. I resign the office of Chief Warlock, effective at this moment. I will submit myself to whatever investigation the director sees fit, and accept whatever censure this body votes, and I will not contest a word of it." He looked down into the well at the boy with Lily's eyes. "I spent 6 years certain that I was protecting the future by arranging the present. A child taught me this morning that a person is not a piece, and that no future, however dark, is worth purchasing with a single stolen childhood. I should have learned it long ago. I had a sister once whom I also decided I knew best for." His voice nearly failed and held. "Harry, I am more sorry than I have the right to say, and I will not insult you by saying it more than once, because you have made it very clear, and very rightly, that you have heard enough words from men who meant well. I will only ask one thing, and you are free to refuse it, as you have been free in nothing else your whole life until this week. When the war comes, and it is coming, let me help you fight it as a person, on your terms, not as your master. As if you will ever permit it, something nearer to an ally who has learned better. You need not answer now. You need not answer for years. I have a great deal of earning to do first. Harry looked up at the old man who had buried him and who had also perhaps saved him, and who was now standing in the wreckage of his own century with his chain of office laid down at his feet, and the boy did the thing that he would understand only much later was the most powerful thing he did in that entire chamber, more powerful than the will or the argument or the turning of the tide. I'll think about it, Harry said, honestly, not as a no. As a maybe that you have to earn the way you should have made me a maybe you had to earn instead of a piece you could move. That's the whole lesson, Professor. You don't get people for free, not even for good reasons, especially not for good reasons. He let it sit. But you turned yourself in when you could have fought, and you told the truth when the truth cost you everything, and you said one true thing this morning that mattered, that I can hold both. So, a maybe, earned. That's more than you gave me, and it'll have to be enough, because it's more than I owe you, and exactly as much as I choose to give. It was the most adult thing anyone in that chamber had ever heard a child say, and it was also unmistakably the voice of a boy who had finally, fully, become his own, and high in the visitors' gallery, an old goblin named Ironclaw turned to the Master of Testaments beside him and said, in the low room's voice goblins reserved for the things that matter, 300 years, Sharptongue. I have waited 300 years to watch a wizard be told the truth by someone he could not buy, frighten, or fool. Write down that we were here. The lights were on, the truth was too loud to bury. And in the center of the well a 7-year-old boy stood between a freed godfather and a faithful friend, holding his parents' restored will in his own 2 hands, and for the first time since a cold night in a vault, he let himself feel the size of what he had done once fully, and then he set it down because there was still a life to claim, and he intended to claim it on his own terms. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. His parents' son, the newspapers, got it wrong for 2 days, and then, because the goblins had given Amelia Bones certified copies of everything, and Amelia Bones had given them to the press without a single redaction, they got it right, and then they could not stop. Boy Who Lived in a Cupboard, said the first true headline, and under it, will suppressed, Godfather jailed 6 years without trial, Dumbledore resigns as Chief Warlock. Harry read it once in the high small room at the top of Gringotts, and then he set it down and did not read the rest, because he had lived it and did not need a newspaper to tell him what it had been, and because what he already carried of it was full enough. The wizarding world reacted the way crowds do when they discover they have been quietly complicit in something monstrous, first with disbelief, then with fury, then with the particular hunger of people who want very badly to have been on the right side all along. Strangers wrote him letters now, real ones, that reached him, because the net that had caught his mail for 6 years had been struck down by the same ruling that struck the seal. They sent him gifts he did not want and apologies he had not asked for, and offers of homes from families who had never once wondered in 6 years where the boy who lived had got to. Harry had the bank return all of it politely, because he had learned in a cupboard exactly how much a stranger's sudden interest was worth, and the answer had not changed just because the strangers were sorry now. He kept 3 letters. One was from Augusta Longbottom, 4 lines, informing him that she had told the whole Wisengamot the truth in her best hat exactly as promised, that her grandson Neville had asked twice whether Harry might visit, and that the door of the Longbottom house was open to him for as long as she drew breath. And I do not say that to people I do not mean it about, Mr. Potter, so do not make me regret being sentimental in my old age. One was from Minerva McGonagall, who wrote that she would be his Transfiguration professor in 4 years' time, and that she intended to be a better guardian of him at school than the adults of his world had been of him before it, and that she was sorry, and that she would prove the sorry rather than merely write it. And one, which he read many times, was from a healer at St. Mungo's, informing him that Sirius Black had survived the first night off the rock, and the second, and that he had asked, upon waking, only one question over and over, until they promised to write it down and send it. Is the boy all right? Tell me the boy is all right. The bank settled his estate in a single morning, and did it with the grim thoroughness of an institution repaying a debt to its own honor as much as to a client. Ironclaw laid the accounts before Harry one at a time, the trust vault restored and replenished, the 6 years of skimmed stewardship fees recovered in full from Umbridge's seized assets and from the ministry's coffers besides, with a penalty atop them that Sharptongue had calculated to the last bronze nut and clearly enjoyed calculating, the main Potter vault audited and made whole. The properties, the heirlooms, the cottage at Godric's Hollow and the house in the north, all returned to the boy's soul keeping under the will's restored terms. The Potter seat sat unvoted now, waiting for him, exactly as his parents had written. The 47 stolen votes were struck. The machine that had run for 6 years on his family's gold and his family's silence was dismantled to the last gear, and the gold came home. "There is one more matter," Ironclaw said, when the accounts were closed, "and it is not a matter of money, which is why I have saved it, because the bank does not often deal in things that are not money and is therefore clumsy at it, so forgive the clumsiness." He set down his quill. "Director Ragnarok has conferred upon you a thing the bank has granted to fewer than a dozen wizards in 3,000 years. You are named Friend of the Bank Kaldunrak in our tongue, which does not translate cleanly, but the nearest your language comes is the one whose ledger we keep as our own. It means that the doors of Gringotts open to you as they open to no other wizard alive. It means that a debt owed to you is a debt owed to us. It means, Heir Potter, that for the rest of your life, in a world that will spend the rest of your life trying to use you, there is one place you may always walk into, knowing that we want nothing from you that you have not freely offered, because you gave us back our honor, and there is no coin that buys a thing like that, and so we will not insult it by pretending there is. We simply owe you, and goblins pay what they owe." Harry looked at the old goblin who had found him weeding a muggle's garden 3 months ago, and who had stood in a cold vault and told him that every word he had been told about himself was a lie, and who had been, of all the strange creditors and rescuers of that strange season, the very first to look at a boy in a cupboard and see a client worth being thorough for. "You came when the letters didn't," Harry said. "You sent a runner the 7th time instead of giving up like everyone else gave up on me. You're the reason I know any of it, so I'll take the honor and I'm grateful, but I want you to know I'd have called you a friend without the title, Ironclaw. You were the first adult in my life who told me the truth and then asked me to be clever about it on purpose. I'm not going to forget which one of you did that first." He paused. "Tell Sharptongue I said his fee calculations were the most beautiful act of revenge I've ever seen. He'll pretend not to care. He'll care." Ironclaw made the sound that was not quite a goblin laugh and inclined his head. The bow a goblin gives an equal, and the matter was closed. And Harry Potter walked out of the bank that morning the wealthiest child in Britain, and far more usefully, the only wizard alive with a fortress of 3,000-year-old creditors who had decided, to their own considerable surprise, that they loved him. There was one piece of business Harry did himself in person before the rest of his life began. He went back down to the vault, the cart through the breathing dark, the cold and the patient silence, Ironclaw at his side and Bogrod the scribe behind. The strongbox stood as he had left it, the red wax of his parents' seal split clean, and above it, where the bruised purple binding had sat for 6 years pressing its borrowed authority over his mother's hand, there was now only a faint, ugly scorch on the iron, because the Wisengamot's ruling had struck the seal void, and the deep magic of the vault had burned the unlawful thing away the instant the law withdrew its protection from it. The purple was gone. Only the pot red remained. "It is yours to do as you wish now," Ironclaw said. "Take the will into the world, leave it here, destroy it, there is no binding left to stop you. The box answers only to your blood." Harry looked at the strongbox for a moment, and then he took the certified copy from Bogrod, and he did not take the original out into the light, because the original had been written by hands that meant it to rest here in the deep, under their own seal and no one else's. He pricked his thumb on the silver pin a second time and pressed the red wax back together over the will, and the seal, his parents' seal, the shield and the crossed sword and key, knit itself whole under his blood, recognizing him, warm in that way that had nothing to do with temperature. And for the space of one breath the cold vault was full again of a woman's laugh and a man's hands, and then it was gone, and the box was sealed once cleanly by the only authority that had ever had the right. "There," Harry said quietly, "closed properly this time, one seal, the right one." He turned from the box. "It can stay here where they put it, the way they meant it. I don't need the paper anymore, Ironclaw. I've got the part that matters." He touched his own temple lightly. "I've had it since the day I read it. The thing they spent 6 years burying was never really the document. It was me knowing, and you can't reseal that. They never could. The ministry wanted to give him an Order of Merlin. 2 of them, in fact, one for himself, restored to the public eye, and one to present on behalf of Sirius Black, exonerated. They wanted a ceremony. They wanted photographs. They wanted, Harry understood at once, to be seen standing beside the boy who lived now that the boy who lived was a hero of a newer and more flattering kind, the child who had exposed a corruption they had all, every one of them, slept through for 6 years. Harry declined. He did it in writing, through the bank, in 3 lines, and the 3 lines were studied in the ministry for a week by people trying to work out whether they had been insulted. "I am grateful for the offer. I would rather the ministry spent the cost of the ceremony on the long-term ward at St. Mungo's, where Frank and Alice Longbottom have lain forgotten for 6 years while this same ministry forgot me. When you have remembered them as loudly as you now wish to remember me, we can discuss medals." H.J. Potter, it was not modesty. Harry had no particular quarrel with being honored, and he knew the value of a public reputation as well as he knew the value of anything. It was strategy and it was principle, and it was, though he would not have used the word, his mother's, because Lily Potter had written, "Do not let anyone make you a weapon, not for a bad cause and not for a good one," and a child paraded across a ministry stage for the gratification of the men who had failed him was a weapon being loaded, however gently. So he refused the stage, and he sent the money to the Longbottoms, Ward instead, quietly, and a great deal more of his own besides, anonymously, so that Frank and Alice would want for nothing for the rest of their long blank lives, and so that the boy he had flown a broom with would grow up knowing his parents were cared for even if they could not know him back. That was the first thing Harry Potter did with his name once it was his own. He refused to let the world spend it and spent it himself on the people the world had forgotten, which was, when Augusta Longbottom learned of it, the only time in the whole affair that the old woman in the vulture hat was seen to weep, and she would deny it to her dying day, and everyone who had seen it had the very great good sense never to mention it. Sirius Black did not heal quickly, because 6 years among the Dementors is not a thing a person heals quickly from, and Harry learned, sitting at his godfather's bedside through the long weeks of that spring, the difference between rescuing a person and saving one, that the first takes a morning in a courtroom and the second takes everything after. For the first week Sirius slept and woke and did not always know where he was, and sometimes in the night the healers heard him talking to people who were not there, to James, to Lily, to a younger version of himself who had not yet made the clever, fatal mistake of trusting Peter Pettigrew. Harry came every day. He did not fill the silences. He had spent 7 years learning the exact weight of company that does not demand anything, and he gave it now, sitting in the chair by the bed with a book he mostly did not read, present and undemanding, until slowly, day by day, the man in the bed began to surface, began to stay in the room when his eyes were open, began to know the boy in the chair, began in the second week to ask questions and remember the answers. "You've got his hair in her eyes," Sirius said one afternoon, propped up against the pillows, thinner than a man should be, but here, all the way here for the first time. "And something that's neither of theirs. They were brave, your parents, but they were warm brave, loud brave. He studied the boy with the dark-circled eyes of a man relearning the world. You're cold brave, quiet. You went and took the whole thing apart without ever once raising your voice, a goblin told me. Where Potter learned to be quiet." "In a cupboard," Harry said. "It's the only thing the cupboard taught me that was worth keeping. You learn to watch instead of shout. You learn that the people in charge always want something, and if you find out what it is before they know you're looking, you've got room to move." He shrugged. "It's not a nice way to learn it, but it worked on Dumbledore so." Sirius Black laughed then, the first time, a rough cracked sound that surprised them both, and reached out and gripped the boy's shoulder with a hand that was steadier than it had been the week before. "James would have been so proud of you he'd have been unbearable about it," he said. "He'd have told everyone, strangers in the street, 'That's my son. Did you hear what my son did to the chief warlock?'" His eyes went bright. "And your mum would have been proud and terrified in equal measure, because she'd have seen exactly what you are, which is a person who will never again let anyone decide his life for him, and she'd have known that's the best and the hardest thing a person can be." His grip tightened. "I'm your guardian, Harry, the will says so. It's the first thing they told me when I woke up clear enough to hear it. You're free, Black, and the boy is yours. His parents named you, and I want you. God, I want you. I've wanted you for 6 years from inside a nightmare. But I have to say the true thing because you of all people have earned never to be lied to again." He drew a breath. "I'm not well. I might not be well for a long time. A child needs more than a broken man and a bedside, so I'm not going to do to you what they did, decide what's best for you and call it love. I'm going to ask you, what do you want, Harry? Truly, it's yours to choose. It's the one thing in the whole world that's finally, completely yours to choose." Harry had thought about it. He had thought about almost nothing else in the chair by the bed through the long, quiet weeks, and he had an answer, and it was, like all his best answers, one that refused the question's hidden assumption that he had to pick only one thing. "I want all of it," he said. "I want you to be my guardian because my dad named you and he was right, and I'm not going to let 6 years of a stolen lie change who my father chose. But I want Remus too, not instead of you with you. You both loved them. You're the last 2 people alive who knew my parents as people instead of headlines, and I'm not giving either of you up to make a tidier arrangement." He looked at his godfather steadily. "Here's what I worked out. You're not well enough to raise a child alone yet. Remus is well, but he's poor, and the world won't let a werewolf raise a child alone either, so we don't do it alone. We do it together, you and Remus and me, in a Potter house with the bank watching the money so nobody can ever skim it again, and Remus does the part of raising me that takes steadiness while you heal, and you do the part that takes knowing who my parents were, and somewhere in the middle of the two of you I get the one thing I've never had, which is a home that wanted me before there was a stipend attached." He paused. "I already asked Remus. He cried, which I'm choosing not to mention to him, so don't either. He said yes before I finished the question." Sirius Black looked at his best friend's son for a long moment, and then he pulled the boy into an embrace that was thin and fierce and smelled of hospital and healing potions. And Harry, who had not been held since he was 4 years old, who had taught himself not to need it because needing it had only ever cost him, let himself be held once fully, and did not analyze it, and did not stand outside it watching, and simply, for the length of one embrace, was a child being held by family who had chosen him. It was the warmest thing that happened to him that year, and he never told anyone about it, and he kept it whole in the part of him that lost nothing, where his father's "I'm glad it was you" and his mother's "you were stolen." There is a difference already lived, and where now there was room for one more true thing. This is what it was supposed to feel like all along. The house in the north was old and good and far too big for 3 people, which was, Sirius said, exactly the right size for a family that intended to fill it with noise. They moved in together in May, Harry and Remus, and Sirius the week he was strong enough to leave St. Mungo's, and the bank sent goblin craftsmen to mend what 6 years of emptiness had let rot, and Remus took the steady work of a household in hand, because steadiness was the thing he was made for and had never once been allowed to be, and Sirius healed by inches in rooms that filled day by day. With the smell of cooking and the sound of an old wireless and the particular warm chaos of people learning to live together on purpose, Harry got a bedroom. It was the first bedroom of his life, and it was larger than the whole of 4 Privet Drive's ground floor, and he found the first few nights that he could not sleep in it, because it was too open and too safe, and a part of him had not yet learned that safe was a thing he was allowed to keep, and Remus, who understood without being told, left a door open down the hall and a lamp burning, not as a comment, only as a fact, until the nights came when Harry no longer needed it, and then. Without a word, the lamp stopped burning, and neither of them ever mentioned that it had. Neville Longbottom came to visit in June, brought by his grandmother in her best hat, and the 2 boys who had been born 3 days apart and handed the wreckage of the same war stood awkwardly in the big garden for a while, not knowing how to be children together because neither had had much practice. And then Sirius produced a battered old broom from somewhere and offered to teach them both to fly, against the loud objection of 2 grandmothers worth of caution, Augusta's in person and Lily's in spirit, and Neville, round-faced and terrified in game, got 6 inches off the ground and stayed there, and laughed, a startled, delighted sound, and Harry laughed with him. And Augusta Longbottom watched the 2 of them from the terrace with an expression that her vulture hat did its best to disguise and entirely failed to. "They never asked me to take you," she said to Harry later, while the boys cooled off with pumpkin juice. "I've thought a great deal about what I'd have said if they had. I'd have said yes, you know. Alice would have wanted it, the 2 of you growing up brothers as your parents and his planned." She watched Neville, who was attempting to explain broomflight to Remus with enormous seriousness. "It didn't happen the way they wanted, almost nothing does, but it's happening now a little 6 years late, the 2 boys in a garden with the people who loved their parents. That's not nothing, Mr. Potter. At my age you learn that 6 years late is a great deal better than never, and that the people who say otherwise have usually never lost anything that mattered." She fixed him with a sharp eye. "Bring him round often, he needs a friend who understands, and so, I rather think, do you, and there are not many in this world who will. You found each other anyway, don't waste it." "I won't," Harry said, and meant it, and the friendship between Harry Potter and Neville Longbottom, which would, in years neither boy could yet imagine, matter a very great deal to the whole of the wizarding world, began that afternoon in a garden in the north, 6 inches off the ground, exactly where 2 dead mothers had always meant for it to begin. Peter Pettigrew was caught in June, and the catching of him was almost an anticlimax, which was, Harry thought, exactly as it should be, that the man who had betrayed his parents and let his friend rot for 6 years should be run to ground not in some grand confrontation but by patient, competent police work, because that was the whole point in the end. The grand confrontations were how men like Dumbledore got to feel important. The patient, competent work was how justice actually got done, and Amelia Bones did it. She had circulated the truth of the animagus to every Auror in Britain, a rat missing a toe, unnaturally long-lived, likely hiding as a family pet, and a junior Auror in a routine sweep of the homes of known former Death Eaters had found, in the possession of a pure-blood family with old sympathies, a fat gray rat that was 12 years old and missing a toe, which is not a thing rats are, because rats live 3 years and keep their toes. They took it into custody. They forced the change. And Peter Pettigrew stood revealed in a holding cell, small and gray and trembling, and under Veritasrum he confirmed every word Sirius had spoken, and the last brick of the lie that had buried Harry's family came out of the wall, and the wall fell. Sirius wanted to see him. Harry talked him out of it. "He's not worth the part of you it would cost to look at him," Harry said, and Sirius, who was learning to trust the boy's cold, clear judgment the way the goblins had learned to, listened and did not go, and was glad of it later. Pettigrew was tried a real trial with a real defense he did not deserve and a real verdict he entirely did, and sent to Azkaban, to the Rock, to the Dementors, and if there was a justice in the symmetry of it, that the man who let an innocent friend rot there for 6 years would now rot there himself, Harry did not dwell on it. He had discovered in himself no taste for vengeance. He had only ever wanted the truth made too loud to bury, and it was now, and the man who had betrayed his parents was simply a closed account, balanced, set aside. Dolor's Umbridge was convicted in May, and it took the Wisengamot a single afternoon, because embezzlement leaves arithmetic, and arithmetic does not weep or curtsy or hide in the shadow of a greater man. The certified ledgers were read, the recovered gold was counted, the forged custody order and its backdated bribe were entered, and the soft pink woman who had spent 6 years building her safety on the principle that small crimes hide best beneath large ones learned the last and most expensive lesson of her career. That when the large crime finally stands in the light and turns to point, the small one beneath it has nowhere left to stand at all. She went to a cell, shrieking still about loyalty and kittens and the gratitude she was owed, and the river of someone else's gold that had made her comfortable for 6 years became, in the end, the precise measure of the years she would spend without it. Albus Dumbledore kept Hogwarts and lost almost everything else, and Harry found that he could live with the shape of it. The Wisengamot censured him formally, struck his 47 votes from 6 years of record, barred him from the Chief Warlock's seat for the rest of his life, and referred his conduct to a review that would shadow him for years. He kept the headmastership of Hogwarts because the school's governors judged, and Harry, asked his opinion, agreed, that a man who had wronged one child terribly was not therefore a danger to 1,000 others, and that Albus Dumbledore teaching children was a better use of a brilliant and broken old man than Albus Dumbledore idle and resentful. Minerva McGonagall would be watching him now, with eyes that no longer assumed his goodness, and Amelia Bones would be watching the law, and Harry himself would arrive at that school in 4 years, a person no headmaster could arrange, and between the three of them the old man would never again be unchecked, which was, in the end, the only thing that had ever made him dangerous. He came to see Harry once in June at the Potter house in the north where the boy had gone to live, and he came alone, and he did not bring instruments or arguments or plans. He stood at the door, an old man who had laid down his chain of office, and he asked permission to enter and waited for it, which Harry noted and credited. "I have begun the earning," Dumbledore said when they were seated, and Harry had given him tea, because cruelty was not in him and an old man's defeat did not require it. "I do not expect it to be quick. I have a great deal to earn back from a great many people and from you most of all, and I am aware I may not live to finish. I came only to tell you one thing which you may keep or discard. The protection on your aunt's house, the blood magic, it is gone now, broken when you left and never to be rebuilt, because such things cannot be made twice. I tell you this not to frighten you, but because you have earned, above every soul alive, never to be kept ignorant of a danger again." His blue eyes were tired and clear. "There are those still in the world who served the thing that killed your parents, and who will not love what you have become, a boy who cannot be controlled, who took apart the careful order of his betters in a single season. You have made yourself safe from the wrong sort of guardian, Harry, which was right and just and brave. But you have not made yourself safe from the world, and no one can, and I would not lie to you that they can. I would only ask that you let the people who love you, your godfather, the wolf, the goblins who have, to my considerable surprise, adopted you, the director who would walk through fire for you now, I would ask that you let them stand between you and the dark when it comes. Not because you cannot stand alone, you have proven you can, but because the whole of your case against me, the truest thing in it, was that a person should not be made to stand alone when they need not be. Do not become in your strength the thing you defeated in my weakness. Let yourself be loved. It is the only protection that does not curdle into a cage." Harry was quiet for a while, turning it over, hunting the edges, and he did not find a lie in it, and he found, somewhat to his surprise, that it was good advice, and that it was the first thing Albus Dumbledore had ever given him that did not have a string attached to the far end. "That's the smartest thing you've ever said to me," Harry said, "and the only one without a plan hidden in it. So noted, earned a little, keep going." He stood, ending the visit, courteous and absolute, because he had learned that from the old man too, the trick of a meeting closed cleanly. "And Professor, thank you for telling me about the wards. You're right that I'd rather know. You're starting to understand me, which is more than you ever bothered to do when you were arranging me. 4 years, I'll see you at your school. We'll find out then how much earning you managed. It was not forgiveness. It was something rarer and more useful, which was a door left open a crack on the far side of a great deal of work, and Albus Dumbledore went out into the June evening having been given the one thing he had spent a century never granting anyone else, a chance, conditional, unearned as yet, entirely in the gift of someone smaller than himself, and he understood at last, walking down the drive, exactly what he had stolen from a boy for 6 years by never offering it. The summer settled around them, and Harry settled into it, and the settling was its own kind of work, slower and stranger than the bringing down of a conspiracy, because a conspiracy has an author and an answer and an end, and a life has none of those, only days one after another that no one was trying to take from him. He learned to fly properly, until Sirius pronounced him a natural and Remus pronounced him a menace, and both of them were right. He learned which of his parents' friends were worth knowing. There were more than he'd expected, once the net was struck and the truth was out. Old members of an order James and Lily had belonged to, who who came shyly to the house in the north to meet the son and to apologize in their various ways for not having looked harder for him. And Harry received each of them with the same level courtesy, and kept the ones who treated him as a person and let go without rancor the ones who treated him as a relic. He read his way through the Potter library, which was vast and strange and full of his ancestors' marginal notes, and he found in the margins the family he had never known, generations of Potters arguing with their books in ink, careful and stubborn and kind, and he understood at last where the cupboard had not, after all, come from. That he had a lineage, and that it was a good one, and that his mother had been right that he had been enough exactly as he was, because he came from people who had always, every one of them, been enough. And in the quiet of those days he let himself think sometimes about the school he would go to in 4 years, about a great castle full of children, none of whom would have grown up in a cupboard, about an old headmaster doing his slow earning, about a transfiguration professor who had sworn to do better, about a friend already made in a garden 6 inches off the ground. He did not dread it, and he did not long for it. He simply noted it, one more fixed point on a horizon. He was, for the first time in his life, walking toward as his own person rather than being carried toward as someone else's piece. The war his mother had warned him of would come, perhaps, by then or after. He would meet it when it did, but he would meet it as Harry loved and stubborn and his own, and not as the weapon a great and good man had once tried so gently to make of him. His mother had asked for exactly that in torn ink in the last 11 days of her life. He intended to give it to her. They buried nothing in the end and unburied everything, and on the last day of July, his 8th birthday, the first birthday anyone had ever marked, Harry Potter went to Godric's Hollow to see his parents. The cottage where they had died still stood, half ruined, left as it had fallen 6 years before as a monument, and Harry looked at it for a while from the lane, the blown-out upper floor where his mother had stood between a wand and his cradle, and he did not cry, because he had done his crying in a vault months ago, and a person does not owe grief a second performance. But he stood there and he let himself feel the size of it once, the place where his life had been broken and his story had been stolen and the long lie had begun, and then he turned and walked into the churchyard where the true thing was. The headstone was white, and it said James Potter and Lily Potter and the dates that stopped too soon, and below the names a line that Harry read once and kept forever: the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. Sirius stood at one shoulder, leaning on a cane he would not need much longer, and Remus stood at the other, and Griffock had come unasked, because the goblins had appointed themselves to this boy in a way that puzzled even the goblins, and the 4 of them stood in the summer churchyard in front of the grave of the 2 people who had written a will in their last 11 days to try to reach across death and protect a son they knew they might not live to raise. They tried so hard, Harry said quietly to the stone. That's the thing I keep coming back to. They knew they might die. They knew it enough to make the will, to hide it where it'd be safe, to write down every name, to tear the page over Petunia, to write me letters. They did everything right, they thought of everything, and it still almost didn't work because one powerful man decided he knew better than the dead. He was quiet for a moment, but it did work in the end. 6 years late and through a goblin bank and a 7-year-old reading his own mail, but it worked. They reached me. Everything they wanted I got, the guardians, the truth, the name. They didn't fail. They just had to wait for me to grow up enough to finish it for them. He looked at the 2 men beside him, the godfather and the brother in all but blood, the exact 2 people the will had named, standing where the will had wanted them. And here we are, where they wanted me, who they wanted me with. On the day they'd have wanted to be here for, they didn't lose Sirius. They just couldn't see the whole board. Mum would appreciate that, I think, that in the end it wasn't the great man who saw furthest. It was the people who just loved me and wrote it down. He knelt and he set on the grave a single thing he had brought from the vault, not gold, not an heirloom, but the certified copy of the will itself, the bank's seal bright on it, the document that had survived being buried and had buried in turn the lie that buried it. He left it there in the summer grass, his parents' last words come home at last to the place their bodies lay, the proof that they had been heard, that their son had read every word and honored every name and become, exactly as his mother had asked, his own person on his own terms in his own name. And then the strangest thing happened, the one thing Harry would never try to explain to anyone, the single moment of the whole story where the cold, clear forensic part of him simply stood down and let something older through. As the evening light came slant and gold across the churchyard, the white headstone seemed, for the space of a breath, to warm, the way the red wax had warmed under his thumb in the vault, that warmth that had nothing to do with temperature, and Harry felt again, faint and far and unmistakable, the thing he had felt with his hand on his parents' seal. A woman's laugh and a man's hands lifting him toward a ceiling that wheeled with conjured stars, and under it, through it, around it, a single wordless certainty pressed into him the way Lily's quill had pressed into the parchment, hard enough to tear. You were wanted. You were never alone. We saw you finish it. We are so proud of the person you chose to be. It lasted a breath. Then it was gone, and the stone was only stone, and the gold light was only evening, and Harry Potter knelt in a churchyard on his 8th birthday with his godfather's hand coming to rest on his shoulder and his father's friends quiet weeping behind him and a goblin standing witness in the grass, and he found that he was smiling, the real thing, unguarded, a child's smile on a face that had finally earned the right to wear one. "Happy birthday, Harry," Remus said softly. "Your first proper one. There'll be a great many more, we'll make sure of it." "Come on, pup," said Sirius, his hand warm and steady now. "Let's go home. We've got a house full of people who chose you waiting to embarrass you about it, and your mother would never forgive me if I let you spend your birthday in a graveyard, however meaningful." He squeezed the boy's shoulder. "There's living to do. You've spent enough of your life on the dead and the guilty. The rest of it's yours. Spend it on something better than they did." And Harry Potter rose from his parents' grave and looked at the 2 men his parents had chosen in the bank that had kept his faith in the long gold evening of the first day of the rest of his life. And he discovered that the boy who had walked out of a garden in Surrey 3 months ago, the boy who had been nobody, who had been told every day that he was unwanted, who had taught himself to read in a cupboard so that he could one day read his own mail and bring down the man who had buried him. That boy was gone, and in his place stood someone his parents would have known on sight, not the boy who lived, not a piece on anyone's board, not a weapon or a hinge or a prophecy or a stipend, just their son, found and free and home and entirely his own. He took his godfather's hand and he walked out of the churchyard into the gold light, and he did not look back, because everything worth keeping he carried with him, whole and unbreakable in the part of him that never lost a single thing, and the rest of his life at last was his to spend on his own terms in his own name, exactly as they had wanted. Chapter 7 End.